Chapter 187. Su Li's expression remained unchanged, but Ling Li could clearly feel that her back suddenly became very sad. The sadness lasted for a moment and then disappeared, which made him think that it was an illusion. Hierarch Ling was confused. What was wrong with him? Why did he have blurred vision when he saw people? Ms. Li said that you can keep it and put it beside my eldest brother. Remember not to touch the ice crystal, or you will be frozen. This is the essence of the ice poison in your body for more than 10 years. Don't be careless. Su Li handed the ice crystal branch to Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan took it carefully and said in a low voice, "Thank you, Miss Su. I will live up to Ms. Li's trust." Ling Qinglan wiped his tears. He was refreshed as if he had been reborn. There was a faint sound of porcelain breaking in his body. His cultivation had been suppressed by the ice poison for too long. Now the ice poison disappeared. What awaited him was the period of eruption of cultivation. After saying goodbye to Ling Li and Chu Lu, Su Li returned to the affiliated school of the National Academy. Mammy Li had prepared the dinner. After dinner, Su Li returned to the study and found that there was a file on the table. The mark on it was sent by Chu Lu. Su Li opened the seal and opened it. The file recorded Su Zipei's words and deeds every day. In recent days, Su Zipei was very close to many young masters of rich and powerful families. Someone taught her the means to communicate with the upper circle in Yunjing. She was a little famous, but it was just a flower name. Even a flower name is extremely great. Su Li felt strange. There were many girls from poor families who were more beautiful than Su Zipei in Yunjing, but few of them could really enter the attention of the young masters of rich and powerful families. Zhu Yang couldn't have such means and vision. The only possibility was that Su Zipei was helped by a senior, but Su Zipei herself had no value. Who would help her? Su Li raised her eyebrows slightly. Even Chu Lu couldn't find that person. It meant that the person's ability to hide was better than the intelligence system of the Hehuan sect. This was enough to arouse vigilance. The Baisho feast will be held in 2 days. Su Li crushed the file in her hand. Her eyes flickered. If Su Zipei really had a hidden purpose, she would definitely give herself away the day after tomorrow. Because of the 100 Beasts feast, the whole city celebrated together. During the autumn hunting meet, the young geniuses had shot and killed countless ferocious beasts. If their corpses were left to rot in the wilderness, how could they bear it? In the year of famine, ordinary people didn't have enough to eat. The so-called autumn hunting contest to celebrate the harvest resulted in a lot of waste. Wouldn't the Dahan country become a country of extravagance where wine and meat stink in the luxurious door and bones of frozen dead on the road? Thus, the 100 Beasts feast was held every year after the autumn hunting meet. The royal guards would collect the corpses of the beasts in the 3-day hunting ground and send them to the imperial kitchen to be cooked into delicacies. Then they would hold the Baisho feast in the largest Shunwu Square in Yunjing City in the name of the chief. All the residents of Yunjing City were qualified to get 1 or 2 kilograms of meat delicacies to taste. Even the passers-by who temporarily lived in Yunjing City had the opportunity to eat it. It was a real festival celebrated by the whole city. Because of this tradition, the common people in the city even named this day Meat-Eating Day, such a simple and crude name. In the expectation of the common people, the day of the Baisho feast came quickly. Before dawn in the early morning, a large number of royal guards came to the Shunwu Square to maintain order. At this moment, the square was full of long tables, but the meat hadn't been served yet. The street outside the circle guarded by the royal guards was already crowded with common people who came to get meat. Although it was crowded, there was no chaos. The road had already been divided by the army. If anyone dared to cut the line, he would be immediately thrown to the back by the soldiers. Meat. Meat. Children with patched clothes played around their parents. Their cheerful laughter infected the common people around them. The Shunwu Square was full of warmth on this day. Gradually, the sun rose from the east. Once it was 7 in the morning, a large number of palace maids and eunuchs immediately carried out fragrant meats and placed them on the long tables. These meats were either roasted, boiled, stewed, or braised according to the quality of the meat. All of them looked, smelled, and looked delicious. The common people waiting outside drooled at the sight. After all the long tables were full, the commander of the royal guards finally shouted in the expectant eyes of the people, "In the first round, 1,000 people enter the field. There is a lot of game this year. Each person can get 3 kilograms of meat." As soon as he finished speaking, the soldiers let them in. Immediately thousands of people rushed into the square, and hundreds of scales were placed at the exit of the square. No one dared to cross the line and take more meat. In previous years, many people had their legs broken because they tried to escape with more meat. Considering the serious consequences, no one dared to snatch the meat. Everything seemed very harmonious. On the other side, Su Li also waited in a long line. She glanced at a large number of common people in the line, took a jade token from her arms and handed it to the soldier who checked. After seeing it, the soldier immediately let them in. "Look, they are people of the National Academy. Are they students of the girls' martial arts school? It's so good to participate in the autumn hunting." Many people were talking about it. Standing outside the circle, they were full of envy. "I will try my best to be admitted to the National Academy next year." No matter how much the people who participated in the autumn hunting had, they could enter the Baisho building, which was specially built for the Baisho feast. Although Su Li only got 2 pairs of animal ears, it was also a harvest. Putting away the jade token, Su Li bypassed the long tables in the square and stopped in front of a 7-story building. This was the Baisho building. On the first floor, there was a hubbub of voices. Su Li glanced around and didn't see any acquaintances. Then she sat at a table and entertained herself by eating. Although the cooks of the imperial kitchen were not as good as her, they were of different factions and had unique tastes. Su Li ate with relish and completely forgot that she could go to the top floor with her identity. For many young talents who entered the Baisho building, of course, they wouldn't forget the purpose of coming here because of meat. Most of the people on the first floor had no background. Otherwise, they could even go to the second floor. They formed groups and cliques, and from time to time, they looked at Su Li, who was eating and drinking with contempt. Naturally, no one on this floor knew Su Li. What's more, Su Li was eating and didn't look up at all. Su Li only ate happily. Suddenly, she stopped. She noticed that there was one more person beside her. Looking up, she saw Ling Li's face full of lecherous smile. He was a standard playboy. Su Li glanced at him expressionlessly, and then continued to eat. Ling Li's face darkened. He was actually ignored. Immediately, he spoke like a playboy and said impolitely, "Hey, it's your honor that I come here. Don't you have any manners?" Su Li heard it and smiled. She raised her head and said politely, "Thank you so much, Child Ling. My identity is humble, and I really don't deserve to talk to you. Child Ling, you'd better go upstairs quickly. If it was a one-on-one meeting, this lass would definitely say, 'I don't have time to chat with you right now. Go somewhere cool and stay.'" For a moment, Ling Li felt strong indignation in his heart. But before he said anything, he suddenly heard a crisp voice. "Second sister, you are here. It took me a while to find you. I heard that you hunted 2 rabbit ears in the hunting ground. It's really amazing." Su Zipei, who wore a blue luxurious dress, suddenly appeared. She held the arm of a playboy who walked unsteadily. She smiled sweetly, which really made her imitate the charm of a rich lady. Su Li raised her head and wiped her greasy fingertips. She smiled warmly and said, "It's you, third sister. I'm really surprised that you can come to the Baisho building." They hadn't seen each other for a long time. The second sister was not a virgin anymore. But she had some guesses when she got the file, so she was not too surprised. Her tone at this moment was like a spring breeze. It was not harsh at all. But when Su Zipei heard it, her face instantly turned livid. Su Li's words were different from those who pointed at her nose and laughed at her. "You can enter the Baisho building by sleeping with a man." She grasped the half-jade pendant on her waist with her left hand and quickly calmed down. She turned to look at Ling Li and retorted without showing weakness, "I forgot to tell you that I got the opportunity through hard work. But you are so insignificant. I don't believe that you can enter the Baisho building without the help of others. And of all the people you could find, sister, Why did you choose a crippled young master with crippled legs? With sister's condition, could it be that you're only worthy of such trash? Suzipe tightened the arms of the young man next to her and sneered. She didn't see that the face of her male companion was green. Suli covered her mouth and chuckled. She shook her head and said, "Child, I advise you to leave as soon as possible." The foppish young man shuddered and immediately shook off Suzipe's hand. Then, without saying a single word, he frantically ran away as if there was a man-eating creature chasing after him. The sudden change stunned Suzipe. She was confused. Why did Child Wang run away? But at this moment, an insolent and wanton scolding suddenly sounded on the first floor. "Ugly girl who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you know who you are talking to?" For a moment, all the people on the first floor focused on them. Suzipe had never experienced such a scene. She was so scared that her face turned pale. But when she heard the words "ugly girl," she was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She screamed and scolded, "Ugly? How am I ugly? You are a disabled person. Are you qualified to say that I am ugly?" Wow, Suzipe dared to scold Ling Li. The crowd burst into an uproar. After all, Suzipe was a vulgar flower who disguised herself too much. When she was angry, she showed her true colors like a vixen on the street. Su Li stood aside and didn't know what to do. But her heart was cold. It was just the right time. Suzipe could see more things when she quarreled with Ling Li good. Ling Li suddenly clapped his hands with a smile and said coldly, "No one has mentioned the word disabled in front of me for many years. You mentioned it twice today. If it wasn't for your sister, I would break your legs and let you have a taste." The eyes of this person were so terrible. Suzipe couldn't help but shiver. The voices of the crowd drowned her ears. Finally, she knew the identity of this person, but she would rather not know it. Where does this silly girl come from? How dare she provoke the first playboy in Yunjing City? According to Child Ling's tone, she seems to be Su Li's younger sister. I didn't expect that Su Li, a talented girl who is educated and polite, has such a rude younger sister. No matter how much Child Ling likes Su Li, there should be a limit. Today, Suzipe provoked him. It's hard to say what will happen. Child Ling, the first playboy in Yunjing City. Suzipe felt dizzy. The person she provoked turned out to be one of the people that the person warned her not to provoke. How could such a person appear on the first floor and happen to be next to Su Li? The voices of the crowd became louder and louder. Suzipe was full of fear. She didn't know where she got the strength from. She ran out crazily and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Ha 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 ha. The crowd laughed, but Su Li couldn't laugh. Instead, she ran out with a worried face. Although the relationship between her and Suzipe was not good at all, she still had to pretend. Ling Li looked at Su Li's disappearing figure and smiled evilly. He waved to Ling Mo at the door and said softly, "The jade pendant on Suzipe's waist is very extraordinary. Go and steal it." Ling Mo nodded. If the person who offended him was not punished at all, the gold-lettered name of the first playboy in Yunjing City would be ruined. Chapter 188. When Su Li returned to the Baisho building, she couldn't hear Ling Li's voice. He was probably found by his brother Ling Ping and pushed upstairs. Suzipe made such a scene, so she lost interest in tasting delicious food and walked upstairs. Many people saw that she was not stopped by the royal guards on both sides of the stairs. They couldn't help but be stunned. It turned out that the status of the girl they mocked just now was far above them. At the same time, Suzipe's footsteps were disorderly. She knocked over several long tables and spilled meat soup. She walked out of the Shunwu Square unconsciously. She suppressed the panic in her heart and barely recognized the direction. Then she ran to the place where she usually met the mysterious woman. She provoked the person she shouldn't provoke. Even her mother couldn't save her. She had to find a way. Today, the street outside the Shunwu Square in Yunjing City was extraordinarily cold. Suzipe ran faster and faster as if hope was in front of her. She turned a corner, but at this moment, a sedan chair came from the corner. Suzipe didn't stop in time. Bang! She bumped into the servant who was carrying the sedan chair. Out! Pei fell on her back and fell on her back, causing the sedan chair to become unstable. The person inside the sedan chair opened the curtain and looked outside. It was a middle-aged man who looked like he was in his 30s. Just by looking at his appearance, one could tell that he was not angry and had a noble air. He was definitely from an extraordinary family. Pei cursed in her heart. Why was she so unlucky today? She not only offended the master of the Ling family, but also bumped into a noble lord on the way. She climbed up hurriedly. The middle-aged man immediately saw the jade pendant on her waist, which made his pupils shrink. He stopped in the air for a long time and didn't respond. "Please forgive me for offending you, Lord." Pei kowtowed several times. The middle-aged man's butler saw that his master didn't respond, so he waved his hand impatiently. Pei was relieved and quickly got up and ran away. She was so happy that she didn't find that when she passed by the sedan chair, a black shadow flashed in front of her and the jade pendant on her waist suddenly disappeared. The middle-aged man came to his sense and immediately became furious. He shouted, "Turn around, quick! Stop that girl for me." The housekeeper's expression changed greatly. He hadn't seen his master get angry for many years. He immediately used his body movement to grab Pei's shoulder and threw her in front of the sedan chair. He apologized, "I misjudged your intention. I deserve to die. Pa." As soon as the middle-aged man got off the sedan chair, he gave the steward a slap and said angrily, "Who told you to be so rude?" Quickly apologized to her. "Yes, yes." The housekeeper didn't dare to refute, for fear of being slapped a few more times. He turned his head and apologized to Pei, "Miss, I was rude just now. I'm really sorry." When the middle-aged man heard this, his expression softened. He couldn't help but turn around excitedly and look at the confused Pei. But when he looked, Pei's waist was empty. Where was the jade pendant? Illusion? The middle-aged man's hand froze in the air. It turned out to be an illusion. But the jade pendant was so real. Did he have so many dreams in these years that it affected his normal vision? Pei thought that it was a blessing in disguise today. She had a chance encounter with the noble master. She was happy. Unexpectedly, the master's face suddenly became cold. She was confused. Before she reacted, she saw the middle-aged man waved his hand with flagging interest and returned to the sedan chair. He said, "Give her some silver as compensation for being frightened. Let's go." The housekeeper seemed to be accustomed to his master's eccentric behavior. He quickly threw a few silver ingots beside Pei and hurriedly called the servants to continue to the Shunwu Square. Pei stared at the back of the sedan chair that went away and then looked down at the silver on the ground. The rich master just left like this. She expected in vain. Pei picked up the silver on the ground and put it in her arms. She spat and said, "People in Yunjing City are really as annoying as my second sister." The middle-aged man who was still paying attention to Pei in the sedan chair saw this scene and shook his head gently. He finally gave up the idea in his mind. How could such a rude girl be his daughter? The sedan chair turned a corner and disappeared. Pei also patted her clothes and stood up. But this pat instantly made her face pale. She didn't dare to look at her waist. She only groped with her hands. But she didn't find anything hard after groping for several times. Finally, she couldn't help but look down. She saw that her waist was empty. She suddenly blacked out and collapsed on the ground. The jade pendant was lost. Her biggest reliance in Yunjing was gone. Without the jade pendant, how could she recognize her ancestors and enter a rich and powerful family? No, it must have fallen on the ground when I ran. Pei knelt on the ground and cried for a moment. Then she immediately looked for it crazily along the road. If there were no people on the street because of the Baisho feast, her crazy behavior would be a first-class scandal the next day. Where is it? Where is it? The more she looked for it, the more panicked and desperate Pei was. Her eyes were full of tears and her sight was blurred. If it was really picked up by someone, she couldn't find it. When Pei was still crazy on the street, the sedan chair had stopped at the edge of the Shunwu Square. The middle-aged man walked out of the sedan chair and looked at the 7-story building in the distance. He murmured, I haven't come to the Baisho building for many years. The butler said at the right time, the emperor said that the Baisho building always belongs to you. There will be no other owner. The middle-aged man shook his head and walked to the Baisho building with a depressed face. If his luxurious robe was ignored, he looked like a scholar who was down and out. It has been so many years. You still can't let it go. The butler sighed and quickly followed him. At this time, Xian Jingju and his wife were taking the meat in the square with a basin. How could they miss such a good opportunity to take advantage of the Baisho building? The proprietress was stuffing meat into her mouth when the royal guards were not paying attention. She looked around cleverly. Suddenly, she turned her eyes and saw the back of the middle-aged man who went into the Baisho building. The smile on her face disappeared instantly, and her ordinary eyes were full of killing intent. What? The butler noticed the gaze and looked back suddenly. But he found that the square was noisy, and no one released killing intent at all. Illusion? The butler shook his head and followed the master into the building. Even if it was not an illusion, the person in the dark would not be so stupid to fight here. Xian Jingju was relieved when he saw the butler walk in. He didn't let go of the proprietress's hand and transmitted the sound in silence. Calm down. Have you forgotten what the abbot of Mount Chan said? Do you have the heart to destroy our 7 years of hard work today? The proprietress took a deep breath, and the red light in her eyes faded away. She bowed her head and continued to take the meat. Xian Jingju couldn't see her face, but he heard her angry words. I just can't accept it. My sister died just like that, but he can live without a care in the world. How could he? Xian Jingju sighed and comforted the proprietress softly. Let's talk about it when we go back. It's not safe here. Xian Jingju didn't hate the man as much as the proprietress. Because he was not the heartless scum in the words of the proprietress. As a prince, he didn't marry in his life. Didn't it explain the problem? But he didn't dare to say this to his wife. As soon as they entered the Baisho building, the middle-aged man attracted the attention of most young people. He seemed to be born with a unique charm, which made people couldn't help but look at him. Who is he? I don't know him. Few young talents who could stand here didn't know the dignitaries in Yunjing City. But today, no one could tell the identity of the middle-aged man. Master, let's go upstairs. The butler suggested carefully. The middle-aged man stood on the first floor for a long time and didn't want to go upstairs for a long time. He glanced at every corner of the Baisho building, and it seemed that the scene in those years appeared in his eyes. It was a pity that the youth had passed. The people and things in those years couldn't come back. Master, it's time to go upstairs. If it's too late, you will lose face when the banquet starts on the top floor. The butler couldn't help but remind him again. The middle-aged man snorted and went upstairs. How can I lose face now? Master, the butler sighed and quickly bent down to follow him. At this moment, Su Li was sitting on the top floor and drinking alone. No one dared to get close to her within 1 meter. Because Playboy Ling said that whoever dared to do anything to her couldn't leave the Baisho building alive today. Su Li was helpless. She could only let Ling Li, the childish guy, do whatever he wanted. Fortunately, Ma Jintian came to provoke him, and Ling Li was busy arguing with him. So, she could hear a lot of peace. If she wanted to act well, she must integrate herself into the role. Su Li glanced at the two people who were still arguing with each other. She couldn't help but feel a little funny. Ling Li played the playboy for more than 10 years, and he undoubtedly played the role perfectly. Step, step, step. At this moment, slow footsteps sounded from the direction of the stairs. Many people turned to look at the direction of the stairs. Who came upstairs? When the face of the middle-aged man appeared in front of everyone, there was a sound of wine glasses falling on the ground. Then, there was a violent uproar. He, unexpectedly, comes here? He hasn't been out of the mansion for more than 10 years, right? He unexpectedly appears this year. Someone said that he was seriously ill, so he could only recuperate at home and couldn't go out. Who is he? The profound families recognized the middle-aged man at a glance, but some emerging families didn't know who he was. Su Li was attracted by the sound and turned to look. The next moment, her pupils suddenly shrank. She seemed to be hit by a heavy hammer. She couldn't hold the wine glass in her hand anymore and let it fall on the table. The wine spilled on the ground. It was him. The first prince, the third prince and the fifth prince almost stood up at the same time. They walked to the middle-aged man and bowed to him. The reason was that he was the younger brother of the emperor, the 8th Lord of Dahan country, Lord Rui. Chapter 189. The princes who were learning to speak at that time had grown up in the blink of an eye. All of them were talented and handsome. Lord Rui didn't show a happy face for a long time. He smiled bitterly. 17 years had passed in the blink of an eye. There are talented people in every generation. The new generation excels the old. You have all grown up. You should learn to share the state affairs for your father. Don't be lazy. Yes, your nephew has learned something. The three of them answered respectfully. Each of them shouted louder than the other, but they had their own thoughts. Uncle Rui was less than 40 years old, but half of his hair was white. If he didn't have few wrinkles on his face, he would look as old as their father who was 60 years old. Is it true that what happened that year? Dongfang Sheng was surprised. He was born the earliest. When that happened, he was sensible. There were rumors everywhere in the imperial palace. He still remembered some of them. As for the third brother and the fifth brother, they should know nothing about it. Since the woman left Yunjing, the scandal about Lord Rui was blocked by the order of their father. If anyone dared to gossip about it, he would face the torture of pulling out his tongue. Wu Jin of the Wu family greets Lord Rui. I am Ma Jintian of the Ma family. Then, all the young masters hurriedly saluted. He was the lord of the Dahan country and the younger brother of the emperor. His identity was more distinguished than anyone present. Only Ling Li sat in the wheelchair. He squinted at them and shouted, "Who is Lord Rui? Ah! I have never heard of him. Is he a fake?" The crowd burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, this idiot even dares to scold Lord Rui. If you are arrogant for a long time, you will get into trouble. No matter how powerful Ling Li is, he absolutely doesn't dare to be presumptuous in front of Lord Rui. Lord Rui raised his eyebrows and turned around. When he saw Ling Li's sloppy appearance, he couldn't help but frown. This guy was obviously a playboy. How could he go to the top floor? Lord, he is Ling Li, the second son of the Ling family. When he was a child, his legs were disabled. In addition, General Ling and General Ling both died in battle. He was not disciplined. So he became like this. The butler transmitted the sound to explain in time. Lord Rui's eyes eased, but he still walked towards Ling Li. People's eyes kept moving with his movements. It was a rare scene that the playboy Ling Li was scolded. When they went back, they would draw it and hang it on the wall to vent their hatred. Lord Rui stopped and sat in front of Ling Li's table. He looked at Ling Li's disdainful face and said in a low voice, "Your father and grandfather are great heroes. Even if you were plotted against and lost your legs, you shouldn't end up like this. You're embarrassing your father and grandfather." Ling Li of wine. He knocked on the table. He said in of Ling of Ling Emperor. Of the wine. Of Ling said of Ruoff of. Of. Sure enough, Ling Li knocked on the table with a bang, and the wine spilled. He said, "Who do you think you are? My father and grandfather died for your Dongfang family. I am disabled. Who do you think you are? My father and grandfather died for your Dongfang family. I am disabled. Does the Dongfang family think that you can laugh at us as you please? What?" Hearing that, the three princes all changed their faces and rushed to Ling Li angrily. Dongfang Sheng said in an imposing manner, "Ling Li, it is treason to talk about the royal family. Do you know your crime?" Ling Li was not annoyed. Instead, he pointed at Dongfang Sheng's face and said to Lord Rui with a smile, "Ha ha ha. Look, you want to punish me. If you are really a member of the Dongfang family, don't hang around in front of me. You are disgusting. You." Dongfang Sheng was scolded with a red face. He looked at Uncle, but Lord Rui didn't move. For a moment, there was a long silence. Finally, Lord Rui moved his lips. He looked apologetic. Ling Li's character had been formed. It would take a long time to change him. It was really inappropriate for him to rashly talk about the Ling family. But his identity was related to the royal family. He couldn't apologize publicly. Sheng, you all leave first. I want to talk to him alone. Seeing that uncle didn't punish Ling Li but seemed to be interested in Ling Li, the three princes frowned slightly. None of them got the support of the Ling family. Naturally, they didn't want Lord Rui to be too close to the Ling family. However, on this occasion, it was expected that they wouldn't talk too much. Besides, facing Ling Li, who was an idiot, they might not even have a good talk. Thinking of this, Dongfang Yang smiled and took a step back. Uncle, take your time. I will leave first. After the fifth prince left, the other two princes also left one after another. Although there were still people peeping at them from time to time, they were far away and the old butler was monitoring them. So, their conversation was not overheard. After venting his anger, Ling Li felt happy and became lazy again. He scratched his chest without any image and lay down on the wheelchair. Ling Mo bent down beside him, lifted his right foot that was about to fall to the ground, put it back to the original position, and covered it with a blanket. The butler saw the exposed muscle atrophy and almost no flesh on the foot. He immediately shook his head slightly. It seemed that the legs of the third master of the Ling family were completely incurable. Lord Rui, you stay alone. What do you want to preach to me? Lord Rui lowered his head slightly and whispered, I was rude just now. I have to admit my mistake. Even if you are a good-for-nothing playboy, I will apologize to you. The old butler's expression changed slightly. He held Lord Rui's shoulder and said, Master. Ling Li was a little surprised, and all kinds of thoughts emerged in his mind. Dongfang Rui was interesting. Ordinary people couldn't have such a broad-mindedness. He could get a lot of fans only by his personal charm. How could he end up alone? Lord Rui's apology. You are a hereditary lord and the brother of the emperor. I can't afford it. Ling Li smiled faintly. He took the jade pendant from Ling Mo's hand and played with it. Su Zipei should be crazy now. However, although the quality of this half-jade pendant was good, it was just broken jade. Su Zipei didn't seem to be a person who would cherish it. Dongfang Rui was a little angry when he heard that Ling Li didn't accept his apology. He raised his head and saw the jade pendant in Ling Li's hand. His body immediately trembled uncontrollably. This time, it was not an illusion. What? Ling Li noticed something strange. Seeing Dongfang Rui staring at the jade pendant in his hand, he seemed to be fixed. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. It turned out to be like this. Ling Li, can you show me the jade pendant in your hand? Dongfang Rui was so excited that he completely lost his calmness as a lord. The old butler was worried. It was true that the lord was ill. Recently, the lord got better. He couldn't have another accident. Ling Li smiled evilly and put the jade pendant on the table. Dongfang Rui immediately grabbed it and looked at it carefully, as if he got a treasure. The fracture was smooth. The jade pendant wouldn't be pricked and bleed anymore. But he knew that this jade pendant was the one he gave to her. It couldn't be wrong. Was Ling Li his son? Lord Rui was confused. When Yun left Yunjing, he couldn't see that she was pregnant. How could she entrust the child to the Ling family? After all, the onlooker saw the game more clearly than the onlooker. Seeing that his master lost his composure, the old butler immediately asked for him. Childling, can you tell me where you got this jade pendant? Yes. Lord Rui suddenly realized that Ling Li was a playboy. He often flirted with girls. This jade pendant definitely didn't belong to him. He snatched it from a girl. In an instant, Dongfang Rui's eyes became extremely terrible. He said, Ling Li, if you dare, Lord Rui, don't be angry. Ling Li interrupted Dongfang Rui with a smile. He sneered, it seems that this jade pendant is very important to you. Why did you lose it? However, I didn't snatch this jade pendant. I borrowed it from a young lady. If you don't believe it, you can ask her in person. After Ling Li said that, he pointed to the direction where Su Li sat today. Dongfang Rui immediately turned his head, but he found that there was no one at the table. Are you kidding me? Dongfang Rui suddenly turned his head and looked angry. But he found that Ling Li also frowned. His expression didn't seem to be fake. He muttered to himself, "It's strange. Where is Su Li?" Su Li. Her surname was Su. Dongfang Rui was shocked and rushed to the stairs. Since she was not on the top floor, it meant that she went downstairs. She was still here when he came, but now she went downstairs and left. She knew her origin. Su Li. Dongfang Rui went down to the 6th floor and shouted loudly. All the young people were shocked. Why did he call Miss Su Li's name? Master. The old butler chased after him anxiously. He said, "Master, don't worry. The Baisho building is your property. I asked just now. Miss Su Li just went out of the gate. We can catch up with her." Dongfang Rui heard that and opened his robe. He used his martial arts to jump out of the window. The surprise came unexpectedly, but he had already prepared for it. He had been waiting for this day for 17 years. Master. The old butler was shocked. He rushed to the window and looked down. The master hadn't used his cultivation for more than 10 years. What if he accidentally fell? He looked out and saw the master landed smoothly and stopped. The old butler heaved a sigh of relief and walked down the stairs. Bang! Su Li looked coldly at Dongfang Rui, who suddenly fell from the sky. She didn't say a word. Seeing Su Li, Dongfang Rui's longing and excitement all turned into a trickle. He was silent. His majestic eyes were slightly red at the moment. His lips wriggled, but he couldn't say a word. Her name was Su Li. Although she didn't look like me and Yoon, her cold and arrogant temperament was very similar to Yoon's. They were practically carved from the same mold. This time, it couldn't be wrong. Did your mother give you your name? Dongfang Rui said this in a trembling voice. He covered his chest and his heart couldn't stop beating. Su Li made a salute and smiled lightly. She said softly, "Lord Rui, I gave my name by myself. I am a member of the Su family. The jade pendant is not mine. Lord, I'm afraid that you have mistaken me for someone else." Dongfang Rui was completely stunned. Did Ling Li lie to him? Or Su Li didn't recognize him? He had imagined the scene of meeting his daughter 10,000 times, but he had never been so heartless. Su Li didn't even give him the chance to say, "I am your biological father." Su Li pursed her lips and stepped back. She bowed her head and said, "If you have nothing else, I should leave." Chapter 190. Master. The old butler came out of the Baisho building and saw Dongfang Rui standing there alone. He was shocked. Did Su Li leave? Wu Bin, why didn't she give me a chance to talk? Why did she leave alone? The old servant called Wu Bin was startled and immediately comforted. "Master, maybe she really isn't your daughter." When that person left, no one knew that she was pregnant. Later, when the corpse was sent here, although this fact was discovered, no one knows whether your daughter is still alive in this world. Dongfang Rui was expressionless. He spread out his right hand and asked, "What about the jade pendant? How do you explain this jade pendant?" This, the old steward sighed in his heart. "Maybe that girl picked up the jade pendant somewhere and kept hearing about you from somewhere, so she came to try her luck. Maybe she's playing hard to get. Master, you must be calm." Slap. It was another slap. Dongfang Rui was angry and said, "Bastard. Back then, you stopped me, and now you're disturbing my thoughts. Do you really want me to be childless and live this life?" "Of course not. Master, I also hope to find Miss." The old butler covered his face and hurriedly explained. It was because of his guilt that he gave up a bright future in the imperial palace and was willing to be an old servant of Dongfang Rui. In these years, even if Dongfang Rui often beat and scolded him, he had no complaints. Because back then, when he personally brought that person's corpse back, he understood that he would never be able to repay the debt he owed in his life. "Master, did you see half of the jade pendant on the road?" Su Zipei walked to Dongfang Rui step by step. She was dirty all over and said with a pitiful cry, "I lost the jade pendant my mother left to me." It was her. The old butler was shocked. It was the little girl he met on the road. Dongfang Rui looked at Su Zipei, who was crying. He suddenly opened his eyes and asked, "What's your name?" Su Zipei was confused, but she still replied, "My name is Su Zipei." Her surname was Su again. Dongfang Rui was completely confused. Which one was his daughter? My jade pendant. Su Zipei suddenly saw a corner of the jade pendant in Dongfang Rui's hand. Her eyes lit up and she seemed to be alive. She grabbed it and ran away. This child's upbringing, Dongfang Rui felt disgusted. But he thought that if his daughter really lived alone in these years and no one taught her the truth of life, it was understandable that she became like this. However, deep in his heart, Dongfang Rui still hoped that Ling Li didn't lie. After all, Su Li was more like him. "Master, leave this matter to this old servant. This old servant will definitely investigate the origins of these two ladies." Dongfang Rui nodded slightly. Suddenly, he felt that the world was spinning and he couldn't stand steadily. The butler was so scared that he hurried to hold him. Pushing away the butler, Dongfang Rui waved his hand and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired. Go back." About the auction house, when the butler asked about the business, Dongfang Rui had already stepped into the sedan. His voice came from the sedan, "Let Commander Hu handle it. Except for the jade pendant, don't worry about anything else." "Yes, Master." After the sedan left, Commander Hu received the message from the butler. He immediately laughed loudly and said, "Commander Wu, leave it to me. I haven't seen you for many years. How are you?" The old butler hurriedly waved his hand and said, "What, Commander? I have resigned my position for more than 10 years. Now I am just an old servant of the master." "Commander." "Senior Wu, why did you do that?" Commander Hu sighed. The old butler shook his head and said, "I made a mistake. The master is not in good health. I will go back to take care of him. Go ahead with your business." Seeing the old butler hurrying away, Commander Hu had mixed feelings in his heart. At that time, he was just a bodyguard of Wu Bin. If it weren't for Wu Bin's appreciation, he would not be the commander of the Royal Guards. It's true that the world is changeable, Hu Daiden sighed in his heart. He put down the meat in the square and strode to the Baisho building. Ling Li crouched by the window on the 7th floor and watched the whole process. There were many thoughts in his mind. When he figured out the cause, a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes. When Su Li was bullied by the Su family in the Desu town, he never doubted Su Li's origin. In other words, he was fascinated by Su Li's hardworking attitude. Today, the jade pendant obviously had a story, and it was likely that Dongfang Rui met the right person by accident. Ling Qinglan has recovered recently. He has nothing to do, so he asks me for errands again and again. Ha ha. Now I have a problem. It was easy for the Lord Rui's mansion to investigate the origin of Su Zipei and Su Li. In just one afternoon, Wu Bin found out the details of the two. The two girls are sisters. Wu Bin was shocked when he got the result. So, would the madam give birth to twins? No. Before getting the exact news, it was better not to make the master too excited. Tell the servants not to tell the master. I will change clothes and go out. You guard the Lord's mansion. Most of the guards in the Lord Rui's mansion were Wu Bin's guards. Because of what happened in those years, he took great pains to strengthen the defense force of the Lord Rui's mansion. The elite force left in the Lord Rui's mansion was even more than a group of people around Hu Daiden. After changing into the official uniform of the Ministry of Revenue, Wu Bin looked at himself. After confirming that he didn't miss anything, he flashed to the Su family's mansion. At the same time, Su Zipei returned to the Lord Rui's mansion. When she came to Zhu Yang's room, she found that the mysterious masked woman was also there. Zhu Yang was full of excitement. She held Su Zipei's hand and said, "Zipei, your chance finally comes. My painstaking efforts are not in vain." Su Zipei stared at her mother blankly. She hadn't recovered from the thrill today. Knock, knock. Wu Bin knocked on the door of the Su house. The gatekeeper opened the door with a puzzled look. When he saw an official, he immediately became respectful. "What can I do for you, Lord?" Wu Bin pointed to the register in his hand and said with a smile, "Is Lord Su at home?" The gatekeeper shook his head and hurriedly opened the door. "Master has been busy and hasn't returned for many days." "Lord, Please come in and wait for a moment. I will invite the Lord out. Wu Bin nodded. After being led to the main hall of the front house, the gatekeeper trotted all the way and disappeared in the yard path. Wu Bin looked at the architectural style of the Su family and found that although the Su family was an unknown small family, the layout of the yard was also unique. The foster mother of the miss should be a well-educated and reasonable woman. In this way, it was more likely that Su Li was the daughter of the Lord. At this moment, there came a sound of footsteps. Wu Bin quickly got up and saw Su Huanli hurrying over. Wu Bin cupped his hands and smiled. Lord, please forgive me for not going out to welcome you. My son hasn't returned yet. May I ask your name and why do you visit my house? Wu Bin nodded and said the excuse that he had thought before, it doesn't matter if Lord Su is not at home. I am an inspector of the Ministry of Revenue. My surname is Wu. Lord Su moved here and the Su family has not been registered yet. So, I come here to register for the Su family. I see. Su Huanli smiled and bowed again and again. Lord, you work so hard at night. It's really hard for you. I will call my family members to come here and cooperate with you to register. That's good. Wu Bin was relieved. Su Huanli was simple-minded and quite easy to deal with. Before long, Ma'am. Su Kui, Zhu Yang, Li Yuelian, Su Qinghao and Su Zipei all arrived, except Su Li. When Wu Bin saw Li Yuelian and Zhu Yang, he secretly thought that there were two madams in the Su family. Su Huanli, 42 years old, from the Desu town of Qinghe province, Zhu Yang, 39 years old, from the Desu town of Qinghe province, Li Yuelian, 38 years old, from the Desu town of Qinghe province, Su Qinghao. Wu Bin was patient and finally waited for Su Zipei. Su Zipei, 10. When Su Huanli was about to say the information of Su Zipei, Zhu Yang jumped out at this time and said with a smile, Lord, let me do it. Zipei and Li are both my daughters. I know their ages best. Su Huanli felt it was reasonable. To be honest, he remembered the ages of his two sons, but he didn't know how old the two girls were. He only knew that they were at the age of marriage. Wu Bin raised his head and looked at Zhu Yang. Since Su Li and Su Zipei were both her daughters, she must be the foster mother of the miss. The year when Madam ran away was 17 years ago. She was pregnant for 10 months and was born. The miss was 16 years old. It would be best if there was a difference in age. Su Zipei, 16 years old, was born in the Qinghe town. Su Li, 17 years old. Wu Bin stopped writing and raised his head with his eyes shining. Is it true? Zhu Yang was scared by Wu Bin's sharp eyes and stepped back a few steps. She nodded without hesitation and said, Of course. It's just the information of my two daughters. I dare not deceive you. What about the birth information? Tell me the birth information of your two daughters. Zhu Yang's expression changed slightly. Of course, she remembered Su Zipei's birth information, but it couldn't be used. As for Su Li's, she didn't remember it and couldn't tell it. Zhu Yang's reaction made Wu Bin think that he got the key. The woman couldn't tell Su Zipei's birth information. It was clear that Su Zipei was the child Zhu Yang picked up. It seemed that Zhu Yang had kept this information for many years alone, and even Su Huanli didn't know it. No wonder that he couldn't find the Su family when he thoroughly investigated the Qinghe province. Great, the miss was still alive. For a moment, he looked at Su Zipei with gentle eyes, but he didn't know that behind the latter's ignorant expression, there was a restless and ecstatic heart. Turning around, Wu Bin became more respectful. He bowed to Zhu Yang and said, I just asked casually. Since you don't want to answer, forget it. My master will visit you tomorrow. I hope Madame Zhu and your daughter Su Zipei can make preparations. What preparations? Su Huanli was confused and panicked. Why did the official's master come to visit when he just asked some basic information? Upon hearing this, Wu Bin let out a clear laugh and said, Presumably, Madame Zhu already knows the specifics. This old servant thanks Madame Zhu for raising young miss for so many years. Then he bowed deeply and left the mansion. He disappeared in the blink of an eye. Yang, what's going on? What does Madame Su Kui mean? Ma'am. Su Kui was confused, but she still asked with a happy face. After the Lord asked about Su Zipei and Su Li, His attitude to Zhu Yang immediately became extremely good. It must be a good thing. Alas. Chapter 191. What? You bitch, how dare you lie to me for so many years? Su Huanli was shocked. How could his biological daughter become a loser who was picked up? This time, Zhu Yang was not afraid but sneered. Ma'am. Su Kui saw that the situation was not good and immediately stood up to be a peacemaker. Son, don't get angry yet. Xiao Yang hasn't finished yet. Seeing that ma'am, Su Kui defended her, Zhu Yang felt warm and said, Mother, don't say that. Even if I am no longer your daughter-in-law, you are still my mother. Yang, you. Ma'am. Su Kui understood the meaning of Zhu Yang's words and was flustered. At this moment, Zhu Yang straightened her back and pointed at Su Huanli's nose and scolded, Su Huanli, I must have been blind to marry you, such a greedy and ruthless man. Zipei was adopted by me, so what? You can divorce me today if you have the guts. Jiyu Shijiu said with a smile. You. Good. Su Huanli was so angry that his face turned red. He looked at the luxurious furniture and was reluctant to smash it. He was so angry that he said, Zhu Yang, we have been married for so many years. When did I owe you anything? Since you don't want to stay, get out. Never. Son, calm down, ma'am. Su Kui persuaded her. Su Huanli was so angry that he couldn't listen to her. He found a pen and paper and wrote a letter of divorce. Seeing this divorce letter, Zhu Yang was overjoyed. In this way, she could live in Lord Rui's mansion justifiably. That was the mansion of the 8th Lord. Good. Su Huanli, you have guts. Zipei and I will stay here for one more night and leave tomorrow. Zhu Yang took Zipei's hand and left hurriedly. She didn't mention Su Li at all. From beginning to end, Li Yuelian was silent. Su Qinghao wanted to say something several times but was stopped by her. Zhu Yang was so kind that she picked up a child from the roadside and raised it. Anyone who knew the affairs of the Su family could tell at a glance which one was picked up and which one was born. Moreover, she clearly misreported the age of Su Li and Su Zipei. She deliberately said that they were 1 year older. According to the original age, Su Li was only 16 years old and Su Zipei was only 15 years old. If the person who claimed to be an old servant was really a servant of a noble family, it should be Su Li who became the first miss. But now it was Su Zipei. Obviously, Grandma also knew the age. Thinking of this, Li Yuelian looked at Ma'am Su Kui, but she saw that Ma'am Su Kui was also looking at her with a pair of warning and fierce eyes. She wanted her to shut. Li Yuelian took a deep breath and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Zhu Yang knew that someone would deliberately test them in disguise. This kind of thing could not be done by Zhu Yang and Su Zipei. Su, Qing long as, she. Long as she, many, she, Su, she, many, many, she, one, Li, one, many, and now that Qingtan was not at home, she did not dare to fight against Ma'am Su Kui in any case. This old woman had always been cruel and merciless. Seeing that it worked, Ma'am Su Kui retracted her eyes and snorted. You are sensible. Back to the room, Su Qinghao held his hands and wondered, Mother, why are you shaking? Are you feeling unwell? Li Yuelian smiled reluctantly and touched Su Qinghao's round head. She calmed down and said, I'm fine. Mom, why didn't you let me say it just now? Auntie clearly remembered second sister and third sister's ages wrongly. She's really muddle-headed. Li Yuelian's face changed greatly. She grabbed Su Qinghao's little hand and said seriously, Qinghao, remember, don't tell anyone about this. Otherwise, you and I won't have a good time. Su Qinghao rolled his eyes and was more confused. But mother, didn't you teach me that it's not good to lie? Hearing this, Li Yuelian's nose turned sour and tears fell. But this was the world of the adults, Qinghao. The world of the adults was full of lies and deceit. Seeing his mother crying, Su Qinghao hurriedly wiped Li Yuelian's tears sensibly and comforted her. Mother, don't cry. I won't say it. I will become a big official like my eldest brother in the future and make you happy every day. Qinghao, Li Yuelian smiled through tears. No matter how bad the Su family was, it was enough for her to have two sensible and promising sons. Su Qinghao, who was lying in her arms, blinked his eyes. Although he didn't quite understand what happened today, as long as the evil aunt intervened, it must be bad for second sister. By the way, second sister didn't come today. Su Qinghao seemed to think of the key, but he didn't tell his mother this time. The young boy also gradually learned to protect the people close to him in his own way. In the middle of the night, everyone fell asleep. Su Qinghao got up from the bed, got out of bed, put on his shoes, put on a cold cloak and went out of the door. Children in Dahan country had to sleep separately from their parents after they were 10 years old. He was already 11 years old this year. There was no one else in the whole yard except Sister Dong who took care of his daily life. Carefully lying by the window, Su Qinghao heard that Sister Dong was asleep and wouldn't wake up for a short time. His childish face showed a happy expression. He immediately trotted out of the yard and ran to Su Li's yard. His small body was covered by the bushes, so he didn't attract others' attention. He successfully came to Su Li's yard in a quarter of an hour and knocked on Su Li's door carefully. Because of the Baisho feast, he clearly remembered that second sister came back today. Su Li was indeed in the room. At the moment when Su Qinghao stepped into the yard, she found him. She didn't get any clue about how her mother died and how her mother abandoned her. She didn't even know her mother's name. Dongfang Rui appeared too suddenly. Because of Ling Li's interference, she met Dongfang Rui too early. So, she didn't know what kind of attitude to treat him. She was confused. So, Su Li didn't go back to the affiliated school of the National Academy to practice. Instead, she returned to the messy Su family. Seeing the Su family quarreling selfishly, she could calm down quickly. After her rebirth, many things were out of her control. Only the fate of the Su family was still in her hands. Second sister, are you there? The voice of the fourth brother came. Su Li smiled and stood up in the dark. She opened the door and said with concern, "Fourth brother, why do you come here in the middle of the night? It's cold outside. Come in and don't catch a cold." Su Qinghao smirked and rushed into the room. He rubbed his hands and rolled his eyes. He whispered, "Second sister, a strange old man came to our house tonight. He asked about you and third sister. First sister deliberately said that you and third sister are 1 year older. The strange old man was very happy and left. I think first sister must want to do bad things to you again. Although my mother didn't allow me to say it, she cried. But if I don't say it, I am not a man to protect second sister. Eldest brother will definitely blame me if he knows it." Su Li chuckled. It was a serious topic, but when Su Qinghao said it, she didn't feel it was serious at all. "Good job, Qinghao." Su Li squatted down and hugged Su Qinghao. She kissed him on his right cheek. Su Qinghao's little face suddenly turned red, and smoke almost came out of his head. "Second sister," she kissed him. "Well, go back. I already know it. You should go back and have a good sleep." Su Qinghao turned around in a panic and walked to the door. He turned back with a bright smile and said, "Second sister, you should also have a good sleep. Eldest brother and I will definitely protect you." Su Li smiled and her eyes were like crescent moons. "I couldn't protect you in the previous life. But in this life, I will never let you stop at the age of 15. After sending Su Qinghao away, Su Li was surprisingly calm. At this moment, she thought it through. No matter what the truth behind Lord Rui and her mother was, the eldest brother and the fourth brother would always stand on her side. In this life, she was not alone. That was enough. Su Li returned to the affiliated school of the National Academy overnight. Even if she knew what would happen during the day, she still left. The Su family had the same opinion. She had no ability to refute. Instead, she would be regarded as a liar who wanted to enter the Lord's mansion by Dongfang Rui. She didn't need to be so miserable. Early the next morning, Dongfang Rui came to the gate of the Su family in splendid clothes. He brought a large number of thank you gifts and a luxury carriage with the royal seal. Swish, swish, swish. Dozens of personal guards of the Lord's mansion lined up from both sides to the gate of the Su family. The ground was shaking. The Su family was immediately alarmed. The gatekeeper opened the gate and poked his head out. When he saw such a scene, he was so scared that he fainted. Dongfang Rui was radiant today and in a very good mood. He waved his sleeves and couldn't wait to step into the gate of the Su family. Su Huanli just came out of the yard of the back room. When he saw the gate was open, he was so scared that he almost peed his pants. But he soon saw the old servant who was following the middle-aged man in a splendid robe. Wasn't he the person who came to check the household yesterday? Wu Bin came forward and made a fist and palm salute to apologize. Head of the Su family, sorry. Yesterday, I pretended to be the inspector of the Ministry of Revenue. I had no choice but to verify something for my master. Su Huanli nodded his head blankly. He had never seen such a noble royal. He couldn't help but ask, "This is..." Wu Bin bowed slightly and said with a smile, "This is my master, the 8th Lord of the Dahan country and the younger brother of the Emperor, Lord Rui." Lord. The younger brother of the Emperor? Su Huanli almost fainted like the gatekeeper. When did the Su family have a relationship with the Lord's mansion? Dongfang Rui smiled and said, "Head of the Su family, this time I only come for my biological daughter, Su Zipei. Because of many things, I lost her outside. Fortunately, the first madam of the Su family picked her up and raised her. I can't repay you. If you have any requirements, just tell me." Su Zipei turned out to be the biological daughter of Lord Rui. Didn't it mean that the Su family was going to be rich? Su Huanli just realized it. He was shocked and ecstatic. But then he thought of a terrible fact. Last night, he had divorced Zhu Yang. That woman did it on purpose. I'm doomed. Puff. Under great joy and great sorrow, Su Huanli raised his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. He fell to the ground and fainted. Wu Bin was shocked and quickly asked someone to arrange Su Huanli's treatment. At this moment, Su Zipei and Zhu Yang, who had dressed up exquisitely, came out. Dongfang Rui's eyes brightened. It was her. Since he accepted that Su Zipei was his daughter, even if Su Zipei didn't dress up, Dongfang Rui could also recognize her. At this moment, he almost felt guilty about Su Zipei. Zhu Yang thought of the mysterious woman's words. She suppressed her excitement and sighed, "Are you Zipei's biological father? Since the old man came to me yesterday, I knew that there would be such a day." Su Zipei's eyes were full of tears of joy. Seeing Dongfang Rui who was like a god, she couldn't help but yearn for him. She threw herself into Dongfang Rui's arms and shouted tremblingly, "Dad, I miss you so much." Dongfang Rui sighed contentedly and tightly held Su Zipei who had grown to his chest. There was no moment in his life that was more satisfying than now. Even if he died now, he would have no regrets. Zhu Yang stood aside and secretly wiped her tears. The plan that she had prepared for more than 10 years finally succeeded. God was kind to her. Wu Bin was happy for Dongfang Rui. The guilt in his heart was relieved a lot. But there was one thing that made him feel uncomfortable. Everything was going too smoothly, so smoothly that he thought he was acting. But he couldn't say why. Maybe it was because of the sudden success after years of hard work that he felt worried about gains and losses. Chapter 192. Su Zipei answered with joy. When she was about to leave with Dongfang Rui, Zhu Yang suddenly pulled her clothes behind her. Then she remembered that she had to arrange for her mother. It was really troublesome. Su Zipei thought so, but she still stopped. Dongfang Rui noticed it and asked, "Zipei, what's wrong?" Su Zipei hesitated for a moment and said embarrassedly, "Father, in fact, my mother quarreled with Father Su yesterday and was divorced. She has nowhere to go now. If I leave like this, it's easy." Hearing that, Dongfang Rui breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled and invited, "Mrs. Zhu, since you are free, how about staying in the prince's mansion for a while? It happens that I still don't know much about Zipei. I need to ask you for advice." Zhu Yang was relieved when she heard that. She said happily, "Thank you for taking me in, Your Highness." "I should thank you." Dongfang Rui shook his head and smiled, "Follow me to the carriage." When Su Zipei and Zhu Yang got on the carriage, Wu Bin ran to Dongfang Rui and whispered, "Master, how should we arrange the gift?" Dongfang Rui looked cold and thought for a moment, Since the gift has been sent, there is no reason to take it back. Although the Su family doesn't know Zipei's identity, she doesn't have to worry about food and clothing. Now that Mrs. Zhu has been divorced and the gift has been sent, the Su family has nothing to do with my daughter, Zipei. Yes, master, I know what to do. Wu Bin understood the meaning of Su Zipei's words. The master wanted Su Zipei to draw a clear line with the Su family. He looked back at the mother and son who were whispering happily in the carriage. It seemed that Su Zipei and Zhu Yang had been tired of the Su family for a long time. They didn't feel sad at all when they left today. It seemed that the first Mrs. Moral character was a little worrying under the guidance of Zhu Yang. On this day, the news that Lord Rui's daughter, who had been lost for more than 10 years, returned to the prince's mansion spread all over the city in a blink of an eye and caused a stir. Everyone was discussing which girl was so lucky to enter the royal family. When it was known that it was related to the Su family, everyone was shocked. Is it Su Zipei who was ugly at the Baisho feast? Are you sure that it's not Su Li? TSK, the Su family really hid it well. I heard that she was secretly adopted by Madame Zhu. The day before the news came out, Su family's patriarch even divorced that madam. He really suffered a double loss. If that's the case, then wouldn't the Su family suffer a great loss? One news after another was dug out. For a time, whether it was the disciples of the National Academy or the ordinary people, the family affairs of Lord Rui's mansion became the topic of their after-dinner conversation. However, the Su family in the center of the incident remained silent. Su Huanli was still in a coma. The blow this time was too big for him. On the other side, the Rui prince's residence was full of joy. The prince's residence, which had been deserted for more than 10 years, was now decorated with lanterns and colored banners. There were happy servants and maids everywhere. Miss, are you satisfied with this outfit? A skillful maid combed a beautiful and delicate hairstyle for Su Zipei. The pearls on her head shone brightly. This is the latest style I learned from the palace. The princesses in the palace also dress like you. Really? Su Zipei's eyes were bright. Before she came to Lord Rui's mansion, she never thought that there would be a whole room for her clothes and shoes. She never thought that jewelry and hairpins could be piled up in several boxes for her to choose. When she asked the maid to open the boxes, she was almost blinded by the glittering of the jewelry. Yes, miss, you are a princess now. The standard of dressing is naturally according to the princess. You can't be worse than the princess. The maid was full of sweet words, which made Su Zipei very happy. The maidservant looked at Su Zipei's reflection in the mirror and couldn't help but feel envious. This girl's luck was really good. She was originally just a pheasant in the countryside, but she suddenly flew up the branch and became a phoenix. She was originally an elite maid specially trained in the palace. When she became a palace maid, she might have a chance to be a master. She didn't need to worry about food and clothing. But now she was transferred by the prince to be Su Zipei's maid. However, as long as she could make Su Zipei happy, her life in the prince's mansion would be quite good. Suddenly, the door was opened with a squeak. The maid woke up and quickly bowed her head and left. It was Lord Rui, Dongfang Rui. Dad. Su Zipei stood up and saluted. Seeing that Su Zipei was dressed brilliantly and more like a princess, Dongfang Rui was very comforted. He said gently, Zipei, now your identity has changed. As a princess, you can't be as rude and arrogant as before. You need someone to teach you etiquette. Come with me. Yes, Dad. Su Zipei quickly followed up and was full of expectation. She kept telling herself in her heart. She was already a princess. Her future opponents would not be Su Li, who had no noble identity like her. She should have a long-term vision. She should look at the princesses who were similar to her. Those were the targets she would compare with in the future. Taking a deep breath, Su Zipei calmed down. She followed Dongfang Rui to get on the carriage and left. At noon, the carriage stopped in front of the National Academy. Dongfang Rui took Su Zipei's little hand and got off with a smile. He said gently, "You will stay in the National Academy and learn etiquette from the teacher." Su Zipei was shocked and said, "Dad, am I a student of the National Academy?" "Of course not. If you want to be a real student of the National Academy, You have to pass the final exam. Now I just help you to go through the back door and teach you some etiquette." Dongfang Rui shook his head and laughed. He explained and took Su Zipei in. He was a member of the Dongfang family. The rules of the National Academy were set by the ancestors of the Dongfang family. As a descendant, how could he break the rules of the ancestors? An Zipei, 3 days later, it will be a good day. I will hold a banquet in the prince's mansion. You can recognize your ancestors and change your surname to Dongfang. You should learn well from the teacher these days. Don't lose your sense of propriety after 3 days. Dongfang Rui was a little nervous and exhorted. But Su Zipei was very happy and nodded without hesitation. Dongfang Rui frowned slightly. Who taught her such a temperament? As the saying went, it was easy to change a leopard's spots. It was not easy for him to let Su Zipei have the temperament and foundation of the Dongfang family. But at this time, Mammy Li passed through the gate of the National Academy with a basket. Every day she went to the rented kitchen yard. Today, there was a magnificent carriage in front of the gate of the National Academy. Of course, she couldn't help but look at it. But when she saw Dongfang Rui with a gentle atmosphere and a smile in front of the carriage, her smile froze immediately. The basket fell from her hand and the eggs were scattered all over the ground. "Master, and, is that the third miss?" "The jade pendant." Mammy Li murmured and couldn't believe it. She said, "Is the third miss the little miss?" "No, the first miss was born 16 years ago. The little miss can't be 15 years old." "Who gave Su Zipei the jade pendant?" "Zhu Yang." Thinking of Zhu Yang's selfish face, Mammy Li suddenly realized and couldn't help trembling with excitement. It turned out that Su Li, whom she had been serving, was the little miss. Zhu Yang abused the little miss since she was a child. It turned out that the little miss was not her biological daughter, but the daughter of Su Yun, the former miss. "Miss, I found the little miss. It turns out that I have been with her all the time." Mammy Li stood on the street, crying and laughing like a madwoman. Suddenly, she realized that it was not the time to cry. Master mistook his daughter for someone else. It must be Zhu Yang who made trouble. Zhu Yang replaced her daughter as a princess. How could she bear it? "Master." She ignored the basket on the ground and rushed to the National Academy. But she was stopped by the vigilant guard before she entered the gate. "Stop. No one can enter without the token." "The token." Mammy Li realized and quickly searched her body. But she suddenly remembered that Su Li's token was thrown in the basket. She looked back at the basket and saw Dongfang Rui, who was about to disappear at the end of the road of the National Academy. She was so anxious that she was sweating. What should she do? It was too late to go back to get the token. But if she didn't go back to get it, she couldn't enter the National Academy at all. Oh my God. Why did she meet the master but didn't give her a chance to talk to him? Mammy Li covered her chest and was full of despair. She wailed loudly, "Master, she is not your daughter. I am Xiaotsue. Quick, turn around and take a look." Mammy Li's voice was far away, but the road was long enough. Dongfang Rui and Su Zipei didn't hear it. They still laughed and disappeared at the end of the road. Seeing Dongfang Rui disappear in front of her, Mammy Li instantly lost all her strength and collapsed to the ground. The gatekeeper of the National Academy immediately drove her away impatiently. "Where did this crazy woman come from? Get out of here. If you dirty the gate of the National Academy like this, I will ask someone to arrest you." Mammy Li shrank and struggled to stand up. She slowly looked back and picked up the basket. When she saw the token engraved with Su Li lying in the basket, she suddenly became serious. Yes, the little miss was more powerful than the miss. She must have a way to see the master. Thinking of this, Mammy Li didn't cook. She took the token and ran to the affiliated school of the National Academy. She rushed to Su Li's study in embarrassment and found that she was dirty. "Little Miss." Su Li put down the medicine bottle in her hand and raised her head. She frowned and asked with concern, "Mammy, why are you like this? What happened?" Mammy Li pinched the corner of her clothes with both hands and looked up at Su Li. But she quickly looked away. Fate played tricks on her. Su Li didn't look like the miss or the master at all. Because of this, Mammy Lee didn't recognize Su Li even though she had been with Su Li for many years. But at this moment, once she accepted the fact that Su Li was the daughter of the Miss, she began to find that Su Li's condensed temperament was really like the Miss. Seeing Mammy Lee's appearance, Su Li relaxed her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Mammy, do you have something to say to me?" Mammy Lee raised her head slightly in amazement, but Su Li continued to say, "The thing about Su Zipei has been spread all over the city. You should have heard it. As early as in the Qinghe province, I found that you are not simple. In the Qinghe girls' school, you are more familiar with the layout of the girls' school than anyone else. After coming to Yunjing City, many servants were at a loss. Only you, Mammy Lee, seem to have lived in Yunjing City for many years. Now, are you finally going to tell me the truth?" Hearing that, Mammy Lee smiled. It turned out that she had been seen through by the little Miss. But this time, she didn't feel creeped out. Instead, she felt gratified. The little Miss did inherit the Miss's mind, and she was better than the Miss. "My name is Li Xiaotsue. I was the personal maid of your birth mother. Miss, you are the biological daughter of Lord Rui." Mammy Lee sighed and finally said the secret buried in her heart for many years. But when she raised her head, she didn't see any change in Su Li's face. Chapter 193. Little Miss, you. Mammy Lee's voice trembled. She didn't expect that Su Li's reaction was so calm, which made her feel cold. Zhu Yang kept the secret so well that she didn't even tell the Su family. There was no reason for the little Miss to know. "Mammy." After a long time, Su Li finally broke the stiff silence. She smiled as if she didn't care and said, "Can you tell me what kind of person my mother is? What happened in those years? According to you, I should be in Yunjing. How could I be in the Desu town, in such a place?" In the end, Su Li's voice was uncontrollably hoarse. She complained, hated, repented. But was it useful? She struggled desperately in the previous life, but she finally poisoned Lord Rui and was sentenced to death. How did all this happen? Who could she blame? Her dead mother. She often thought that if she didn't appear in the Desu town at the beginning, maybe nothing would happen. Mammy Lee burst into tears when she heard the trembling voice. It turned out that the little Miss was not cold-blooded. She just pretended to be strong. She walked over and took off her dirty clothes. She hugged Su Li's thin shoulders tightly and said, "Little Miss, your mother didn't abandon you on purpose. She was forced to entrust you to me. It's my fault that I lost you. But I didn't expect that you were with me all the time." After she calmed down, Mammy Lee finally told her what happened in those years. At that time, Su Yun was the most talented girl in the Qinghe town. She entered the Yunjing National Academy with the first place in the major examination. She met Dongfang Rui, who also studied in the National Academy. Finally, they fell in love with each other and promised to marry each other. Su Yun was a rare genius of the wisdom circle in the Dahan country. Such a talent was enough to overshadow her humble background. Her marriage with Dongfang Rui was not stopped. Instead, it was a big event in Yunjing City at that time. But Su Yun disappeared the night before the wedding. "I was originally a maid of the Lord Rui's mansion. Later, I was assigned by the Lord to be the personal maid of the Miss. The Miss treated me very well. I was naturally grateful. That night, when the Miss went out of the Lord Rui's mansion, she said that someone wanted to talk to her about some private matters. I was worried and followed her secretly." Speaking of what happened in the past, Mammy Lee's eyes flashed with fear. She said, "I only practiced some common skills to increase physical strength in the prince's mansion, so I couldn't see clearly what happened at that time. I only remember that there were shadows everywhere around you that night. It seemed that some people were fighting together. I don't know where the strength came from, but I carried the unconscious Miss away. Those people were clearly skilled in martial arts, but they didn't chase me. I wanted to go back to the Miss's mansion, but I found that there were people guarding all the way. I could. At that time, the Miss and I hid here and there. We went to the Miss. Then I found that the clan's Miss, Su's Tian. At that time, the Miss and I hid from place to place. We rested in the ruined temple at night and went out to do some odd jobs during the day. With the Miss's wisdom, We hid safely for 9 months. 9 months later, the miss gave birth to you on a stormy night. She was very weak, but the clan's pursuers came at this time. Speaking of this, Mammy Lee looked painful. She suppressed her voice and said, at that time, the miss and I were chased to a dead end. Finally, near the Desu town, the miss entrusted you to me. She chose to face the pursuers alone and left a way for you to live. Su Li narrowed her eyes and smiled. It turned out that her mother was Su Yun. Coincidentally, her surname was Su. Everything in the world had failed her, but her mother didn't. Even though it had been 16 years since what Mammy Lee said, she could still hear Su Yun's love for her from the words. It turned out that she once had the selfish and great family affection. Later, I never heard the news of the miss. I was sleepy and hungry when I held you. Finally, I fell on the side of the road. When I woke up, you were gone. Later, I sold myself to the Su family in order to fill my stomach. Now I think about all kinds of coincidences. Alas. Mammy Lee couldn't help but wipe her tears. The miss had suffered too much since she was a child. Once she almost died outside. Fortunately, the first master treated her in time. Now every time she thought of it, she would have a cold sweat on her back and be scared. Do you know who mother went to meet back then? Su Li suddenly asked. Mammy Lee frowned and shook her head. I just became the miss's maid at that time. The relationship between us was not close. How could the miss mention such a secret to me? Su Li thought about it. Mammy Lee said that her mother was a rare genius in the circle of wisdom. It meant that her mother knew the intrigue in Yunjing. The day before the wedding, her mother rashly went out alone to meet others. This kind of thing should not be done by her mother. So, the person that her mother wanted to meet must be someone she absolutely trusted. But if she thought so, there was another problem. According to Mammy Lee's words, her mother went to the capital alone and there was no particularly trustworthy person around her. Unless the person who asked her out to meet was Dongfang Rui, but it was also very abnormal. At that time, her mother had lived in the prince's mansion. If she wanted to meet Dongfang Rui, she could meet him at any time. So, if we know who my mother met with, we can know who the murderer is. Su Li knocked on the table. It was not appropriate for Chu Lu to investigate this matter. The He Huan sect was an outsider. If they wanted to investigate what happened more than 10 years ago, it was too difficult. It seemed that she needed to use her favor in advance. Little miss, your top priority now is to explain it to the prince. I was selected by the prince to marry the miss. The prince loves the miss so much. He must remember me. I just saw the prince enter the National Academy with Su Zipei. As long as you go with me, you can definitely expose Su Zipei. Mammy Lee told her what happened just now. Su Li raised her eyebrows slightly, but said with a smile, it turns out that Mammy Lee is in conflict with the people of the National Academy. Oh, little miss, why are you not anxious at all? Mammy Lee was so anxious that she was about to get angry. Think about how you have been living these years. Even the business of the Su family is supported by you. Zhu Yang and Su Zipei took your jade pendant to recognize their relatives. Do you still care about the relationship between you and Zhu Yang? Su Li was still not in a hurry. She stroked the black shell and said faintly, Zhu Yang and ma'am. Su Kui repeatedly forced me into a desperate situation, but I forgave them again and again. Mammy Lee, do you know why? Mammy Lee was slightly stunned when she heard that. Isn't it because the miss still cares about the kinship? Giggle, Su Li laughed out. She looked out of the window and said in a cold voice, what do I care about? Is it because Zhu Yang always sent people to beat and torture me? Or because she forced me to eat pig's feed and drink muddy water? Or she repeatedly sent killers to assassinate me? Mammy Lee's hands and feet were cold. It turned out that Zhu Yang not only didn't like Su Li, but also wanted to get rid of her. It was terrible. Under Zhu Yang's various evil schemes, the little miss was not hurt. Instead, she lived better and better. Later, the little miss was completely out of Zhu Yang's control. The little miss was so powerful. Mammy Lee gradually became obedient. She bowed her head and asked, Miss, what are you going to do? I have my own arrangement. Don't worry. You can accompany me to the Lord Rui's mansion 3 days later. Su Li ordered softly and pointed to the scarlet invitation on the table. Mammy Li's expression changed slightly. It seemed that she knew what the miss would do. I watched him build a tall building and entertain guests. I watched him collapse. Su Li said leisurely with a smile, I have long wanted to see how Zhu Yang and my dear third sister would make a fool of themselves in Yunjing City. Now I can finally see it. At this moment, Su Li seemed to be incarnated as a devil. Mammy Li was cold and speechless. Would the miss want to see such a little miss? In the Maureen Street, Su Li came to the street. Looking at the bustling crowd, she couldn't help but smile sweetly and walked in openly. At the moment when she stepped out, someone from the Tianya house immediately sent the news to Ling Li and others in the Ling mansion. Su Li came to me. Ling Li was slightly surprised. She was so proud that it was impossible for her to seek help for the position of a princess. He was afraid that she came to ask for something else this time. Ling Qinglan raised his head and frowned. How could he forget the life-saving grace? Although Ling Li paid the price, he and Ling Li were different. If he could, he would like to help Su Li restore her identity to repay the life-saving grace. However, he collected a lot of information these days. He found a lot of old things, but there was no information that could help Su Li. Let's go to the headquarters first. Ling Xian, you stay to deal with accidents. Yes, master. Ling Xian stood up and watched them leave. Her smile turned cold. When did Su Li even know the headquarters of the Enmore cult? Unless master took her in, she couldn't know it. Master, you have been fascinated by the witch. It's useless for me to say anything. I can only save the Enmore cult in my own way. Don't blame me. Ling Xian muttered to herself. Her tears fell silently. She turned around and gradually disappeared in the darkness. Ling Mo, have you found that Ling Xian is a little strange recently? Ling Li suddenly asked on the way of the carriage. Ling Mo was stunned and then shook his head blankly. He was good at paying attention to the enemy's movements, but women, forget it. I asked the wrong person. Qinglan. Ling Li turned his head. Ling Qinglan spread his hands and said helplessly, Ling Mo doesn't understand women. Do I know them well? However, Ling Xian is a little strange recently. She goes out too many times. Although it's all because of the affairs of the cult, she likes to stay with you before. Is it possible that she finds another man outside and falls in love with him? Ling Li's face darkened. He knew that Ling Qinglan couldn't say anything good. However, Ling Xian had followed him for so many years, so she was worried. Ling Mo, ask the people around you to secretly check what Ling Xian has been doing recently. Ling Mo's expression changed slightly. He sat up subconsciously and said, use them? Otherwise, what do you want me to do? If I use the power of the cult and the Tianya house, Ling Xian must be aware of it. Ling Li pointed at Ling Qinglan and scolded him, if Ling Xian does something stupid like you, I will be furious. Ling Qinglan didn't know what to say. Chapter 194. In the blink of an eye, it was the evening of the third day. Lord Rui's mansion was unprecedentedly lively. There were many carriages in front of the gate to congratulate him. The rumors spread quickly. The past of Lord Rui, who was not famous before, had been turned upside down. Except for the things about Su Yun, other things that happened to Dongfang Rui since he was a child were told vividly as if they were true. So many people. Of course, Lord Rui was the closest brother of the emperor. In recent years, Lord Rui was depressed because of his daughter. He didn't see anyone. Now that the princess has been found, Lord Rui's mansion must be lively. Dang dang dang. Gongs and drums suddenly sounded. Wu Bin ran out in a festive red dress and shouted, the auspicious time has come. Guests come in. Many noble guests who had stayed outside for a long time filed in with invitations. The manservant who was responsible for counting gifts also shouted at the same time, Lord Ma, the Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, sends a pearl of the Donghai Sea. Congratulations on your safe return, Princess. Lord Chen, the Minister of the Ministry of Penalty, sends. Su Li followed the crowd into Lord Rui's mansion and looked around the place where her mother used to live. She dressed very low-key today. She could make herself inconspicuous. In addition, she didn't send a congratulatory gift, so the gatekeeper didn't call her name. Lord Rui held a big banquet for his daughter. As long as they received an invitation, they could come in and eat for free even without a congratulatory gift. Looking down at the invitation in her hand, she stood quietly in the crowd. Dongfang Rui had already believed that Su Zipei was his daughter and should not remember her. This invitation was likely to be sent by Zhu Yang or Su Zipei. Show off. Su Li turned her head and saw Ling Li and Ling Qinglan enter. Then she saw Su Zipei, who was shining with pearls, took Dongfang Rui's hand and walked out slowly. Su Li smiled. Su Zipei, are you ready to accept the ending of this life? Dongfang Rui, who was wearing a purple golden dragon robe with 3 claws, walked slowly. He didn't show much cultivation, but many people felt a strong pressure. The momentum of the Dongfang family is so horrible, some people couldn't help but be speechless secretly. Compared with the Dongfang family, which could support a country, their families were too small. Greetings, Lord. Long live the princess. The two of them stood still. There was no need for anyone to greet them. All the guests bowed in unison. This was the custom of this world with strict hierarchy. After 3 days of hard work, Su Zipei could more or less maintain a calm and composed face. But today, she suddenly saw the people who she used to have to humble themselves and call child were all bowing to her. Her chest could not help but heave violently. However, Dongfang Rui was very satisfied that Su Zipei could do this. He smiled and his gentle and magnetic voice spread throughout the banquet hall. This king was fortunate enough to find the little girl's pendant. Today, I'm holding a feast to celebrate. As long as you don't ruin this place, feel free to do as you please. After Dongfang Rui finished his words, the guests burst into laughter. Some people flattered him, Lord, you are so kind. After the laughter, Dongfang Rui stretched out his hand and pressed it down. He continued, although my wife and I didn't get married until 1 day later, I had already regarded her as my only wife. Now Zipei comes home, she should give up her original surname and change it to Dongfang. Today, I will host the banquet and announce it to the world. In the future, Su Zipei would change her name to Dongfang Zipei. For a moment, the whole hall was silent. They had expected such a day, but they did not expect that Lord Rui was so anxious that he wanted to marry Su Zipei after only 3 days. Dongfang Rui frowned slightly and asked, What? Is there anything wrong with this king's decision? Seeing that Dongfang Rui was angry, someone immediately stood up and bowed repeatedly, I dare not. It's natural for the princess to change her surname to Dongfang. How can we have any objection? Yes, we have no objection. No objection. People echoed one after another. Dongfang Rui was slightly relaxed and gradually smiled. Although he knew that he forced everyone to accept Zipei's identity, it was up to Zipei herself to let the subjects and people of the Dahan country recognize her. Zhu Yang sat at the main table and watched the scene excitedly. After tonight, she would be the adoptive mother of the princess. Moreover, Zipei was her biological daughter. Naturally, she would not treat her too badly. Years of hard work were not in vain. She finally became a member of the circle of noble ladies in Yunjing, and her status was extremely high. I have an objection. Suddenly, a lazy voice rang out. Although the voice wasn't loud, it was extremely ear-piercing amidst the shouts of agreement from the crowd. In an instant, everyone's gazes turned towards the direction of the voice, and a strange expression appeared on everyone's faces. It turned out to be him. The first playboy in Yunjing City, Ling Li, the little master of the Ling family. Dongfang Rui was angry and didn't smile anymore. He shouted angrily, Boy of the Ling family, you deceived me at the Baisho feast and almost made me mistake my daughter. I haven't settled the score with you yet. How dare you make trouble at the feast? Ling Li touched the crown on his head and said with a smile, Why are you angry, Lord Rui? It was just a joke that day. Who knew that you took it seriously? Besides, it is still unknown whether the girl named Su Zipei is your daughter or not. Dongfang Rui's expression changed instantly. What did you say? Wu Bin also stood up angrily. Third child Ling, you can't talk nonsense about it. If you can't tell us the reason, Even the old lady can't save you. Hey, butler, don't say that. I was entrusted by someone. Why blame me? Ling Li seemed to be afraid and quickly waved his hand. But he was not afraid at all. It was clear that he was teasing Wu Bin. Wu Bin was immediately angry and said, "Come on, wait." A low voice came. Wu Bin was stunned and looked back. It was his master, Lord Rui, who interrupted him. Dongfang Rui's face was as cold as ice. He asked in a deep voice, "Ling Li, did you say that you were entrusted by someone? Who entrusted you?" Ling Li smiled and pointed to the young man who helped him push the wheelchair behind him. Ling Qinglan knew that it was time for him to show up. He immediately took a deep breath and stood up to salute, Ling Qinglan of the Ling family. "Lord Rui." The originally deathly silent guests immediately burst into exclamations of surprise. "Ling Qinglan. Isn't he the chief officer of the Supreme Judiciary and the first detective of the Dahan country? He actually didn't agree with Su Zipei changing her surname? Could there really be a mistake in this matter?" In the blink of an eye, the tone of the guests had changed. If Ling Li represented the first troublemaker in Yunjing, he was absolutely unreliable. But the words of Ling Qinglan were more credible. Ling Qinglan ignored the whispers around him and continued, "Lord Rui, I didn't care about what happened at the Baisho feast after my cousin told me. But later, when it was said that you recognized Su Zipei of the Su family, I suddenly felt strange." "Nonsense. Your Highness, you mustn't listen to this kid's nonsense." Ling Qinglan's words were suddenly interrupted by an extremely sharp female voice. Dongfang Rui looked back and saw that Zhu Yang stood up and pointed at Ling Qinglan. Her saliva was flying. She was undoubtedly a shrew. "I picked up Zipei that year. The jade pendant was in her swaddling clothes. I remember it clearly. How could it be wrong?" Zhu Yang said so firmly. Dongfang Rui had more confidence in Su Zipei. He turned his head and said in a cold tone, "Ling Qinglan, what else do you want to say?" Ling Qinglan smiled slightly and didn't panic at all. He said loudly, "Lord Rui, I went to the Qinghe town last year because of the official silver case in the Qinghe province. Unfortunately, the Su family was involved in it. So, I investigated all the information of the Su family." Hearing that, Zhu Yang's expression changed in an instant. She remembered that what Ling Qinglan said was true. He didn't come earlier or later, but stood out at this time. It was clear that he deliberately targeted her. No, she must find a way to fight back. But she didn't find that Wu Bin saw all the changes in her expression. Ling Qinglan deliberately paused to keep the guests in suspense. Then he said, "At that time, the third daughter of the Su family, Su Zipei, was clearly only 15 years old. Lord Rui, your daughter should be 16 years old. First of all, the age is not right. It is impossible for Princess Rui to give birth after 2 years of pregnancy." Hearing that, the crowd was in an uproar. Ling Qinglan said at this moment, "The second daughter of the Su family, Su Li, is 16 years old this year. Mrs. Zhu, you lied about the age of the 2 daughters. Who is talking nonsense? Do you know now?" Zhu Yang's face was pale and she couldn't say a word. But at this moment, Su Zipei, who had been silent, suddenly said, "Lord Ling, I know you. What you said is right." Everyone was shocked. Did Su Zipei admit that she deceived Lord Rui? Before the crowd could react, Su Zipei continued, "My adoptive mother picked me up and raised me secretly. In order to get away with it and not clash with my second sister, my adoptive mother did tell me 1 year less when she reported my age. My adoptive mother told me this privately later. My jade pendant was given to me for safekeeping after I grew up. Lord Ling, if you refute me with this reason, I can only say sorry. My adoptive mother had no choice but to make a false household registration." Then, Su Zipei raised her head and looked at Lord Rui with tears in her eyes. "Father, you believe me, right?" Dongfang Rui's expression eased a lot. Although this child was naughty, her temperament was still simple. She didn't deceive him, let alone on this occasion and this kind of thing. "Ha ha ha ha," but Ling Qinglan suddenly laughed, which made everyone feel inexplicable. Dongfang Rui suddenly turned his head and said, "What are you laughing at? Ling Qinglan, I give you a chance. Now. Before I have the mood to punish you, Get out of here. Lord, you asked me what I was laughing at. Ling Qinglan shook his head slightly and looked at Su Zipei, who pretended to be calm. He said with some pity, I laughed at Mrs. Zhu and Miss Su Zipei. I just said half of my words, and you can't wait to jump out and deny it. Miss Su Zipei was quick-witted and came up with a good reason. But it's hard to say next. Then, Ling Qinglan turned his head and bowed. He said, Lord Rui, I am absolutely sure that I am standing here. But time is pressing. I can't tell you before the banquet. It's really a sin. Su Zipei's eyebrows twitched. She couldn't think of any loopholes in this matter. Even the gap of age was blocked by her. How could this damn Ling Qinglan have a way to prove that she was fake? Dongfang Rui took a deep breath. Ling Qinglan's performance and Zhu Yang's exaggerated reaction made it difficult for him to believe the young girl beside him. Dongfang Rui nodded weakly and said seriously, What else do you want to say? Just say it. Ling Qinglan nodded and said to Wu Bin, Butler Wu, can you ask the gatekeeper to let in a mammy? Hearing the word mammy, Dongfang Rui was shocked. He remembered that Su Yun didn't disappear alone, but they disappeared together. Was her personal maid still alive? Wu Bin saw that Lord didn't respond, so he sighed and motioned the gatekeeper to let in the maidservant. Mammy Li, who had dressed up carefully, walked in nervously under the crowd of guests. She saw that the layout of the Lord's mansion was the same as before, and the osmanthus trees, which were the favorite of Miss, were planted. She couldn't stop crying. Chapter 195. It's really you. Dongfang Rui recognized Mammy Li at a glance. He had dreamed about the scene when Mammy Li and Su Yun left Yunjing many times. Even though it had been more than 10 years, Dongfang Rui still felt very familiar. Mammy Li wiped her tears and bowed to the ground. She said, Prince, Li Xiaotsue is back. Get up. Dongfang Rui let go of Su Zipei and directly jumped off the platform to help Mammy Li up. He said, What happened that year? Tell me in detail. The sudden appearance of Mammy Li shocked Zhu Yang and Su Zipei. They didn't expect that the maid who sold herself to the Su family was originally a servant in the Lord Rui's mansion. Ling Qinglan said at the right time, Lord Rui, I found the personal maid of Su Zipei after many inquiries. What do you want to ask? Mammy Li will tell you everything she knows. But you'd better deal with the current affairs first and then make a plan. Dongfang Rui tightened his lips and stared at Mammy Li. He said, Mammy Li, tell me, is Su Zipei my biological daughter? At this moment, everyone held their breath and waited for Mammy Li's answer. Su Zipei and Zhu Yang were so angry that they wanted to kill Mammy Li with their eyes. Zhu Yang even began to look for the mysterious woman in the crowd. She hoped that she could take action again and make Mammy Li speechless forever. Seeing this scene, Wu Bin immediately approached Mammy Li stealthily and looked around with vigilance. The woman in green who hid in the crowd scolded rubbish in a low voice. She put away the hidden weapon in her hand and left without hesitation. Wu Bin and Ling Qinglan defended together, so she couldn't succeed. Prince, Su Zipei is Mrs. Zhu's biological daughter. When I fainted on the roadside, Mrs. Zhu took the little miss away. Then the jade pendant was taken away by her and left to Su Zipei. The little miss has suffered a lot these years. It's all my fault. After Mammy Li wailed, she was choked with sobs. Dongfang Rui's pupils shrank and gradually turned red. In this way, Zhu Yang and Su Zipei were not his close people, but the culprits who made his daughter suffer. Su Zipei knelt on the ground with a thud, and the pearls in her hair scattered all over the ground. Her little face was lifeless, and tears flowed down, ruining her makeup. She was about to become Dongfang Zipei. Why didn't God open his eyes and let Mammy Li stand out at this time? At this moment, Zhu Yang had no time to care about her daughter. She retreated to the back of the crowd and took off her luxurious clothes. It was a big crime to deceive the Lord. Even if Su Li pleaded this time, Lord Rui would not let her go. But she was found by Wu when she ran a few steps. Li's face. Zhu Yang and Su Zipei were caught by Rui Li and said, Li's Li. Before Zhu Yang could react, she was pressed to the ground by the guards of the prince's mansion and could not move. Lee's SS Lee's SS Lee, and Su was shocked. Lee's S bin zipei fang ping. Su Lee's Su said. Lee's Ming Lee and Lee. The Lee is that the fang. Yun is. Lee is. Ming. Everyone left sensibly, but they were all excited in their hearts. Yunjing City would be more lively tomorrow than before. In the blink of an eye, all the guests left. Ling Qinglan and Ling Li also left. Only Mammy Li stayed in the mansion. Dongfang Rui helped Mammy Li, who knelt on the ground. He was about to take her to the room. Mammy Li was stunned and looked back. But Su Li was not in the mansion. "Little miss!" Mammy Li screamed and ran to the door. Dongfang Rui's expression changed slightly. He followed her immediately. Mammy Li went out of the door and saw Su Li. She shouted and ran after her. "Little miss, why did you leave?" Dongfang Rui saw Su Li again. He was stunned. It turned out that everything went back to the original point. Ling Li was right. The daughter he pointed out to her by chance was really his biological daughter. But when he saw Su Li's cold face, he couldn't help but feel sad. Yes, just like her, he didn't care about the so-called dignitaries. How could Yun's daughter be as greedy for fame and fortune as Su Zipei? He was immersed in the fake warmth of father and daughter, but he didn't want to think of the truth. Mammy Li looked at the father and daughter and didn't say anything for a long time. She consciously kept silent and waited for the development of the situation. "I'm disappointed in you." After a long time, Su Li finally said. What she said made Dongfang Rui feel cold. She said, "Mammy said that my mother was a genius in the wisdom circle. Her husband should be calm all the time and have excellent planning ability. But you just listened to one side of the story. You don't want to think more. There are many loopholes, but you don't want to doubt more. Are you tired because you haven't found your biological daughter for many years? So, you are eager to find a daughter?" Dongfang Rui's face was pale. He took a few steps back. He was heartbroken. But he couldn't refute every word of Su Li. "Miss," Mammy Li murmured. She was sad. She didn't want to see the relationship between the father and the daughter become so cold when they just met. Su Li turned her head and suddenly smiled. She looked at Dongfang Rui and continued, "Mammy, don't worry. I'm not angry. I'm just telling a fact. If the dignified Lord Rui is just like this, I don't want the so-called recognition." "Li, you," Dongfang Rui clutched his chest and sighed. "Don't call me Li." Su Li's eyes suddenly became fierce. She said, "Before I marry you, you are not qualified to call me that." Dongfang Rui's lips moved, but he didn't say anything. Wu Bin couldn't stand it. But he didn't do things well before, so he was too ashamed to blame Su Li. He could only beg, "Little Miss Su, it's all my fault." "It's not the Lord's fault. The Lord has never stopped tracking down the murderer. For so many years, the Lord has not married a princess under the pressure of the Empress Dowager. Even if you don't want to come back for the time being, don't be so decisive. The Lord's health." "Wu Bin." Dongfang Rui interrupted him. He looked at Su Li and said slowly, "It's wrong. Su Li, I don't beg you to come back or meet my father. I just beg you to give me a chance to redeem myself. For your mother, I won't be a coward anymore." Then, Dongfang Rui handed the jade pendant in his hand. His dignified face gradually showed a pleading expression. Su Li gently patted Dongfang Rui's hand and shook her head. She said, "There's no proof. I never believe in any promise. When you know the truth about my mother's death, I may consider accepting it." Then, Su Li glanced at Mammy Li and said, "Mammy Li, you stay in the Lord's mansion to tell him what happened that year. I'm going back." "Little miss," Mammy Li called her. Seeing that Su Li didn't turn around, she could only sigh. The little miss was still as stubborn as before. When Dongfang Rui heard the agreement that Su Li said, he saw a glimmer of hope that Su Li could go home. He immediately took Mammy Li back to the Lord's mansion in a hurry. He didn't forget to order, Wu Bin, send someone to the affiliated school to protect her. "If anything happens to her, I will hold you responsible." "Yes, Lord. I will never make mistakes this time." Wu Bin nodded repeatedly. He had made mistakes again and again. If the miss was in danger at this moment, he would rather die for Su Li. Tonight, many people were sleepless. Mammy Li and Dongfang Rui talked by candlelight at night. They knew that Su Li was tortured by Zhu Yang when she was a child. She was so thin that she didn't look like a human. They knew that Su Li relied on her own efforts to get a trace of vitality. Behind the glory of the so-called lecturer of the affiliated school, there was endless bitterness and suffering. He couldn't imagine how Su Li, at such a young age, managed to survive alone. Dongfang Rui suddenly felt that Su Li's indifferent temperament became excusable. On the contrary, he was too naive to fantasize about his daughter's ideal character. When Dongfang Rui was still learning about Su Li's past, the news that the Lord Rui's mansion made a big mistake blew through every corner of Yunjing City like a tornado. The topic about Lord Rui and the Su family became more and more popular. Even in the remote Juyu winery, many drinkers sat in the winery and talked loudly. After the business was closed, the proprietress cleaned up the dishes and kept watching. When the sun was setting, she finally saw her husband come back. She frowned and was about to get angry. Xian Jingju quickly begged for mercy. "Honey, wait. Don't fight. I didn't stay idle for a day and a night. I went to do business." Bang! The proprietress sat at the table, and the ground shook. She said fiercely, "Say it." Xian Jingju closed the door of the winery and said, "Last night, I successfully sneaked into the Lord Rui's mansion. What happened that night was really shocking. Can you guess what happened?" The proprietress took a kitchen knife and picked her nails. She sneered and said, "Are you going to tell me that Su Zipei and her mother joined hands to deceive Lord Rui?" "Honey, how do you know?" Xian Jingju stared at her. The proprietress was so angry that she laughed and said, "This matter has spread all over Yunjing City early in the morning. How do you ask me how I know it?" "Well, Xian Jingju, where did you go today? If you don't tell me the reason, I won't let you go." Hey, don't be angry. I was really delayed by something." Xian Jingju pulled up his sleeves and showed a black hand. He made a gesture. The proprietress's expression instantly became serious. She pulled the door bolt and didn't clean up the dishes. She directly took Xian Jingju to the underground adytum and helped him bandage the wound. "Hey, be gentle." Xian Jingju was in pain and gasped, "I did sneak into the Lord Rui's mansion yesterday, but I didn't hear it. After Yun's personal maid appeared, I found that someone around me revealed the intention to kill. After Wu Bin noticed it, the person quickly restrained his smell and retreated. I chased after him." Slap. The proprietress bandaged the wound and patted it hard. Xian Jingju screamed in pain. "Honey, you are going to murder your husband." The proprietress said bitterly, "Don't you know what you are capable of? If they outnumber you, aren't you courting death by chasing after them so rashly?" Although the proprietress's tone was harsh, the concern revealed in her words could not be faked. Xian Jingju smiled embarrassedly and scratched his head. He said, "I dare not do it next time. But I was lucky this time. That person was not as good as me. After I caught up with her, I fought with her for a few moves. But your moves were big, so you were plotted against, right?" The proprietress rolled her eyes and said, "Fortunately, although the poison on the hidden weapon is powerful, it is easy to detoxify it for people above the inborn realm. I didn't bring any weapons. Although the little girl's Shengong level is high, her cultivation is not as good as mine. If I had a weapon, I would definitely be able to stop her." Xian Jingju still wanted to say a few more words, but he was scared by the proprietress's eyes. He quickly changed his words, "I won't dare to do it next time. Saving my life is the first priority." The proprietress replied softly and was silent for a moment. Suddenly, she hesitated and said, "I heard from those drinkers that Yun's daughter is Su Li. She didn't recognize Dongfang Rui. Now she lives in the affiliated school of the National Academy. Shall we go, Su Li?" Xian Jingju was refreshed and said, "The abbot of the Chan Mountain didn't lie to us. Yun's daughter really appeared. But at this time, we can't act rashly. Lord Rui will definitely send a large force to guard the affiliated school of the National Academy. If we break in, we will alert the enemy. Besides, Su Li doesn't know our identity and may not be willing to cooperate with us. We'd better wait for the opportunity in secret. The proprietress hesitated for a while and finally nodded. Chapter 196. In the imperial study of the imperial palace of the Dahan country, a grey-haired old man was lying on a soft bed and taking a nap. He was dressed in a yellow robe and had a crown on his head. Although he looked old, he exuded boundless majesty, like a true dragon. He was the emperor of the Dahan country and the leader of the Dongfang family, Dongfang Xiao. After a while, Eunuch Feng bowed and came in. He whispered in Dongfang Xiao's ear, "Your Majesty, the 8th Lord wants to see you." Dongfang Xiao raised his wrinkled eyelids and said unhappily, "What does he come for? Haven't I already followed his wishes and made an exception to let that wild girl marry into the Dongfang family?" Eunuch Feng waved his hand helplessly and said, "Your Majesty, something went wrong. The 8th Lord was cheated. Now Zhu Yang and Su Zipei have been detained by the Supreme Judiciary." Dongfang Xiao finally opened his eyes a little. Then he sat up straight with the help of Eunuch Feng and said, "In this case, let him come in." After a while, Dongfang Rui came in and saluted, "Brother." People said that he had a good relationship with the third brother, but they didn't know that the relationship between him and the third brother was the furthest. The so-called relationship was deliberately spread by the third brother in order to show his ability. However, because of such a rumor, he could easily get the consent of Dongfang Xiao and let Su Zipei marry into the Dongfang family. Unfortunately, Su Zipei became Su Li. Things became much more complicated. "Third brother, you don't come for nothing. I have heard about the Su family. Since Su Zipei cheated, the Supreme Judiciary must punish her severely. I have told you before about the Dongfang family tree. Forget it." After hearing it, Dongfang Rui bowed his head and said, "Brother, I don't come for the family tree. I'll get straight to the point. The person who attacked Yun'er that year, Imperial brother actually knows who it is, right?" "What?" Dongfang Xiao's turbid eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. He said in a low voice, "Dongfang Rui, do you know what you are talking about?" "I know." Dongfang Rui looked straight at Dongfang Xiao and didn't show any weakness. He said, "Brother, if you still care about your brotherhood, tell me who killed Yuna. How dare you?" Dongfang Xiao was furious. He stood up and scolded, "The elder brother is the father. Imperial mother and imperial father have both passed away. Is this how you speak to your third brother?" Plop. Dongfang Rui knelt down without saying anything. He lowered his head and said nothing. Dongfang Xiao was moved. He pointed at Dongfang Rui for a long time, but didn't reprimand him. "Forget it, forget it. I won't forgive you if you offend me like this again." An hour later, Eunuch Feng saw that Dongfang Rui left angrily. He walked in slowly and saw that Dongfang Rui was frowning and resting. He couldn't help but worry, "Your Majesty, if you say so, Yunjing City will be in chaos." Dongfang Xiao lay on the soft bed again and scolded with a smile, "You old servant, do you really think that I will impulsively tell him the murderer because of 8th brother's heartfelt words?" Eunuch Feng's expression changed slightly. Then, "The Wu clan has indeed become a little arrogant in recent years." Dongfang Xiao closed his eyes and said slowly, but his words were full of bloodthirst. He said, "It's okay to let 8th brother kill the Wu clan's spirit," and Dongfang Xiao sneered and said, "Those stupid sons of mine really think that they can win by cooperating with a 9th grade sect? As the sons of the Dongfang clan, they don't think about defending the family against external enemies and solving internal troubles. Instead, they invite a wolf into the house. They are a group of idiots." Eunuch Feng quickly lowered his head. At this moment, what he had to do was to listen. Being in the emperor's company was like being with a tiger. If he talked nonsense, the consequences would be bad. In the past, the Dongfang clan and the Hehuan sect were no different. They were rootless duckweeds. If they were careless, they would be destroyed in the martial arts circle. After several generations of efforts, the Dongfang clan became the ruler of a country. Its status is comparable to that of the 8th grade sect. But Sheng and others did compromise to cooperate with the Hehuan sect. How short-sighted they were. Speaking of this, Dongfang Xiao suddenly opened his eyes and said, "So what? Since the eighth brother is willing to take action, I will take this opportunity to teach Sheng and others a lesson. I will let them know what real power is." Eunuch Feng was in a cold sweat. The emperor's simple answer actually involved so many intentions. It was really difficult to guess the emperor's mind. He thought of Lord Rui, who left angrily and sighed in his heart. The most heartless was the emperor's family. This saying was true no matter which dynasty it was in, it was applicable. Su Li stayed in the affiliated school of the National Academy recently and didn't go out. She wanted to go to the Linli building to have a look, but many people of the Lord's mansion were hiding around. In particular, Wu Bin's cultivation reached the inborn sixth hurdle, which was only one hurdle lower than hers. It was extremely difficult to deal with him. If she disappeared rashly, she would definitely be discovered. Fortunately, this situation didn't last for a long time. Wu Bin was called back by Dongfang Rui. A group of royal guards with low cultivation couldn't stop her. In the middle of the night, Su Li changed into night clothes and left the affiliated school. She rushed to the Linli building. But she met Fang Yuan on the way. They stood on the roof and looked at each other for a moment. Then Fang Yuan immediately went back. Since Su Li came, he didn't have to take risks in the affiliated school. When they arrived at the Linli building, Yin Xuetong opened the back door vigilantly. When she saw Fang Yuan and Su Li, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief. She patted her chest and said, "I was scared to death. How did you come so fast?" "I met them on the way," Fang Yuan explained and followed Su Li into the room. They went all the way to the underground adytum. "Where is Chu Qingning?" Su Li glanced at them and didn't see the face with a smirk all the time. She actually felt a little unaccustomed. "Su Li, I was just about to tell you." Yin Xuetong was happy and said, "Chu Qingning went outside the city to break through." Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows. That guy was so lucky to encounter the opportunity to break through the inborn realm. It is related to the winery next door. Thinking of the rumors in the city these days and the words that Chu Qingning asked her to convey, Yin Xuetong and Fang Yuan couldn't help but feel complicated. They always had doubts about Su Li's origin. Until now, they didn't know that Su Li was the princess of the Dahan country. Seeing their subtle expressions, Su Li raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Why? Do you think that the position of princess can make me give up everything in front of me and go back with Dongfang Rui to recognize my ancestors?" Su Li Yin Xuetong was moved and said, "If it is just because of us, you don't have to, it is not because of you." Su Li interrupted Yin Xuetong and said indifferently, "My goal is not to be a member of the royal family. You just need to keep the agreement between us and don't care about other things." Su Li's words were very heartless. But Fang Yuan and Yin Xuetong were not stupid. They naturally knew that Su Li dissociated herself from them because she didn't want them to have too much burden. Alas, Yin Xuetong sighed softly and didn't mention the previous things. She said, in addition to practicing, Qingning stayed underground every day to eavesdrop on the movements next door. He really heard something very shocking. He took this opportunity to find the opportunity to break through. He told me in a hurry and went outside the city to break through. What a lucky guy. What did he hear? Su Li shook her head and laughed. Before the age of 20, people had simple life experiences. It was not easy to break through the inborn realm. It was totally lucky to break through like Chu Qingning. Yin Xuetong looked strange and said, "Su Li, the pair of seniors in the inborn realm next door seem to be your elders." "Huh?" Su Li was slightly stunned. Yin Xuetong continued, "Chu Qingning heard that they always wanted to see you, but they couldn't find the opportunity. The proprietress seems to be the elder sister of a person named Xiaoyun. If I remember correctly, your biological mother seems to be called Su Yun." Fang Yuan also looked strange. Yin Xuetong kept them guessing and didn't want to say it a few days ago. In this way, weren't Xian Jingju and his wife Su Li's aunt and uncle? In that case, their previous efforts to rope in the two of them would have been in vain. Su Li was silent. She unconsciously recalled the events of the previous life. Unfortunately, the memory of the proprietress in the previous life was too little. She had no impression of how she died. Su Li, why don't we go to the next door to sound it out? Fang Yuan suddenly suggested. Su Li rubbed her eyebrows and waved her hand. She walked into the depth of the adytum and said, "Don't act rashly and alert the enemy. The authenticity of the news has not been confirmed. It is not wise to go rashly. We will observe this matter for the time being. Tomorrow, you and I will go to see Chu Lu." The cold voice gradually faded away. Yin Shuatong was full of admiration and couldn't help but praise. This matter is clearly related to her relatives, but she did not lose her calm and still made the most accurate judgment. She deserves to be the person I admire. Seeing that Yin Shuatong was infatuated with Su Li, Fang Yuan shook his head and turned away. Calm? Why did he think that Su Li was more afraid? Just like the closer you are to your hometown, the more timid you are. Her relatives were only separated by a wall, but she didn't have the courage to see them. At this moment, in the deepest part of the adytum, Su Li closed the stone door and took a deep breath. She sat down against the stone wall and thought deeply. Would the proprietress be her aunt, if so many years had passed? Xian Jingju and the proprietress had always been in Yunjing. Were they also there that night when her mother escaped from Yunjing? She wanted to ask clearly, but as Fang Yuan thought, she was afraid. She was afraid that the news Chu Qingning heard was just an illusion, like flowers in the mirror and the moon in the water. After seeing Chu Lu tomorrow, I will make a plan. Putting aside the distracting thoughts, Su Li's eyes became clear. She still had a lot of things to do. She could not avenge her mother and fulfill Ling Li's wish just by talking. She lit the stone lamp, and the light in the stone room was illuminated. 8 topless coffins came into view. The people lying in the coffins were the killers she had brought back from the hunting ground. At this moment, Su Li took a deep breath. As her eyes turned, a wisp of dead grey suddenly emerged from the bottom of her eyes. At the moment when the dead silence appeared, the 8 corpses lying in the coffins suddenly trembled, and then sat up straight from the coffins. Their eyes lit up. That was the green light emitted by the corpse puppet. Chapter 197. In the morning of the next day, Su Li disguised herself as a child. Fang Yuan also changed into a suit of fancy clothes and changed his appearance. He left the Linli building and went to the Hongyang house. As soon as he stepped into the brothel, there were many prostitutes who dressed in revealing clothes and tried to attract customers. "Good morning, child, sir, come and play. I have been waiting for you for a long time." Fang Yuan's face was taut and his eyebrows were twitching. He was taught to focus on practice since he was a child and never touched these things. Today was the first time that he came to the brothel. Su Li saw Fang Yuan's expression and couldn't help but chuckle. She transmitted the sound in silence. "Relax. You don't really come to visit prostitutes. Take this brothel as your opponent. Acting skills are also the foundation of a person's strength. Compared with Chu Qingning, you are too serious." Hearing Su Li's words, Fang Yuan felt happy and natural. However, he felt uncomfortable to visit a brothel with Su Li in the early morning. When they came to the Hongyang house, Su Li was very anxious. She hurried to the procuress and said, "Mom, where is Miss Chu? I came over early today. She wouldn't be busy, right?" The procuress didn't remember what Su Li looked like, but she asked the same question every day. She immediately replied, "Oh, you are so impatient. But today, Susha is having a bad day. I'm afraid that she can't receive guests." Su Li was slightly shocked and remembered the agreement made by Chu Lu in advance. She immediately showed disappointment on her face and turned away. She didn't forget to turn back and tell the maidservant, "It's really unlucky. Mom, when Miss Chu recovers, you must inform me. There are other girls in the Hongyang house. What do you think?" "No, no, no. I want Miss Chu." "Well, take care, child." Fang Yuan showed a look of unlucky and followed Su Li away. But he didn't think about Chu Lu's strange behavior. He thought that Su Li was a girl. Why could she play the role of a prostitute so well? Could it be that this was the so-called acting talent? After Su Li left, the procuress stopped smiling and went upstairs. At this moment, there was a fat old man in a black robe in Chu Shi's room. There was a conspicuous scar on his face from his ear to his mouth. Every time the old man smiled, the scar would be exposed, which looked extremely horrible. Lady Chu is really popular in Yunjing City. At this moment, the old man with a knife scar was smiling at Chu Lu. Chu Lu covered her mouth and chuckled. She looked away and said, "Elder Dao, you are really good at joking. I am a prostitute. If I am not popular, how can I deceive those officials and nobles? Aren't I contributing to our sect? Looks like the sect master was right to send you here. In the past, you never said the words my sect." Elder Dao nodded slightly. He unscrupulously glanced at Chu Lu, who was wearing revealing clothes. He smiled meaningfully and said, "As long as you can satisfy me in these days when I am here, I will definitely put in a good word for you in front of the hierarch when I go back. At that time, the hierarch may be happy and teach you the marvelous martial arts of the Hehuan sect. Maybe you can become a core disciple of the Hehuan sect." If the words of the old man with a knife scar were heard by any slutty woman who was sincerely devoted to the Hehuan sect, she would be very happy. But Chu Lu was not. She only had one feeling now: nausea. Fortunately, her experience in these years was not in vain. Chu Lu didn't seem to have a bad sense of direction. Instead, she was pleasantly surprised with a trace of pity. She said, "Elder Dao's proposal is very attractive to me. But, Elder Dao, have you forgotten something? If Elder Dao also wants to suffer from the Hongchen powder, I have no objection." As soon as she said that, Elder Dao's face immediately changed. How could he forget that Chu Lu had the Hongchen powder that Hierarch personally planted on her body? Although he might not be infected if he had intimate relations with her, he didn't want to take that kind of risk. Thinking of this, Elder Dao's face was full of bad luck. He looked terrible. After drinking the wine in the cup, he stood up and said domineeringly, "Hierarch ordered me to take the full moon and heartstring. All the people of the Hehuan sect in Yunjing City must listen to my instructions. Lady Chu, I have to trouble you to collect intelligence these days. You don't need to care about other things." Then, Elder Dao left the room without looking back. The beauty was in front of him, but he couldn't kiss her. Why did he stay here? Seeing that he left the Hongyang house, Chu Lu breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't know when her clothes were wet. When Mr. Li suddenly came to find her, she was scared out of her wits. Fortunately, Mr. Li reacted very quickly and Elder Dao didn't notice anything unusual. Chu Lu pulled up her clothes and lowered her head. She looked gloomy. Because of the Hongchen powder, she was free from being polluted by Elder Dao. But she didn't feel happy at all. The so-called Hongchen powder was the poison of the stove planted by Hierarch himself. This kind of poison would break out every half a year. When it broke out, the whole body would be in great pain. It was as if the bones were burning. It was better to die than to live. Every time, if there was no medicine given by Hierarch, she would be tortured to death. Joining the Hehuan sect was just an expedient measure. Unexpectedly, Hierarch liked her and regarded her as his exclusive property. She didn't want to yield, so she was planted with the Hongchen powder by Hierarch. In the following years, every time the Hongchen powder broke out, she wanted to die. But the obsession in her heart made her survive in the dirty Hehuan sect. Relying on her intelligence, she took the opportunity to come to Yunjing. 10 years. 8 years have passed. Chu Lu clutched her chest and muttered to herself. Every woman who was planted with the Hongchen powder could only live for 10 years. Because in the 10th year, she, the stove, was like a ripe fruit that could be picked after being cultivated for many years in the eyes of Hierarch. At that time, she would be recalled to the Hehuan sect and become a sacrifice for Hierarch's great improvement in cultivation. At that time, she only heard from the women who were also planted with the Hongchen powder. Every woman who was used as a stove died miserably in the hands of Hierarch. Some people said that when the Hongchen powder broke out, the body would melt into blood and then be refined into elixirs by Hierarch. Some people said that after 10 years, the body of the poisoned would gradually die, but the wisdom would still be there. She would watch herself being swallowed by Hierarch little by little. It was extremely cruel. No matter what kind of death it was beyond the limit that normal people could bear. Therefore, Almost all the women who were planted with the Hongchen powder at that time died. Only she was still alive. There were many restrictions on this kind of secret method of grafting cultivation. Only when the recipient had little resentment in her heart took the Hongchen powder for 10 years could it be regarded as a qualified medicine primer. Otherwise, hierarch was likely to be disturbed by it and be possessed by the devil. Of course, Chu Lu was resentful. Her resentment was even stronger than anyone else's, but she didn't show it, so that hierarch always thought that she was still kept in the dark. Hierarch still had the sweet dream of taking the Hongchen powder for 10 years. Her original idea was very simple. If she couldn't find the news of her brother, she would go back and give the hierarch of the Hehuan sect a hard blow to avenge herself. But now, Mr. Li undoubtedly changed her idea a lot. Putting aside the distracting thoughts, Chu Lu thought of the agreement with Su Li before. But she was not anxious. Although Elder Dao came for the auction fair, he might send someone to monitor her. So, she had to be more cautious when meeting Mr. Li. Chu Lu waited patiently for a day. Elder Dao hurriedly took people out. She still dealt with the information presented by the spy as usual. After 3 days, Chu Lu finally confirmed that Elder Dao didn't send someone to monitor her. Instead, he focused on finding the disciples of the Lianxia cult. Then that night, she immediately put on the night clothes and rushed to the Linli building that Su Li mentioned for the first time. At this moment, in the dead of night, the back door of the Linli building was as dark as ink. Chu Lu was perturbed. She knocked on the door regularly in the dark. After a while, the back door opened quietly. At the same time, she heard the familiar voice of Mr. Li come in quickly. There was no time to see the situation in the room. Chu Lu quickly flashed into the room. The back door was closed immediately. The alley became dark again. Chu Lu squinted her eyes and finally adapted to the sudden bright light. She saw that the person who opened the door for her was a girl. She seemed to be 17 or 18 years old, but she couldn't see through her cultivation. Chu Lu was slightly shocked. The people around Mr. Li were really very young and talented young men and women. After a few steps, Chu Lu saw the young man who had been in contact with her. She immediately saluted subconsciously. Chu Lu greets protector Fang. Yin Xuetong covered her mouth and smiled silently. Su Li really liked to give them boring ranks. Only from this point, it could be seen that Su Li was the same as them. They were still peers who liked to play pranks. Fang Yuan was helpless, but he nodded expressionlessly. He pushed the door open and said, "The master has been waiting for you for a long time. Go in." Fang Yuan found that he said the word master many times. He seemed to be numb to the point that he didn't feel ashamed. Chu Lu took a deep breath and walked into the room. The door behind her was immediately closed. She was shocked. Suddenly, something flew towards her. She was nervous and slapped it to the ground. It made a crisp sound and the fragrance of wine assailed her nose. Chu Lu just calmed down from the shock and found that it was a glass of wine instead of a hidden weapon that flew to her. "This is the wine I brewed. You refused it without saying anything. It really makes me sad." Su Li came out in a simple cyan cloth and smiled brightly. Chu Lu suddenly saw Su Li. She was about to salute, but then she felt something wrong. Subconsciously, she stood up straight, and then she looked more and more shocked. "Did Mr. Li become shorter? Since you are here, don't be nervous. Sit down and talk." Su Li poured another glass of wine for Chu Lu and chuckled, "What you see is still not my true face. But this time, my height is real." Chu Lu took the glass carefully. She was still vigilant and didn't dare to drink. However, when she heard Su Li's big truth, she inevitably felt a little curious. Was Mr. Li born short or he was too young? Seeing that Chu Lu was always nervous, Su Li lost the intention to continue to ease the relationship. She decisively asked, "What happened in the Hongyang house?" Chu Lu immediately became serious. She habitually lowered her voice and said, "Elder Dao of the Hehuan sect came. Now, except for the Hongyang house, I can't mobilize other people in Yunjing City. Hierarch seems to want to rob the full moon and heartstrings. Even men will be tempted by that kind of treasure, let alone your hierarch, Yi Tian. She founded the Hehuan sect for her own selfish desire. If she doesn't rob the full moon and heartstrings, unless the old woman dies, Su Li said sarcastically. In the previous life, she often dealt with the Hehuan sect. Some people in the martial arts circle even jokingly called her and the hierarch of the Hehuan sect the double poisons of the martial arts circle. She was chased by the old woman for several years and paid a great price to kill her. Chu Lu listened quietly. It was the first time for her to hear the real name of the hierarch of the Hehuan sect. Chapter 198. Shaking her head, Chu Lu drove the face of the hierarch out of her mind. She was just a nobody. It was useless to think too much. Ms. Li, although I was deprived of the command, I still know the personnel changes of the Hehuan sect. The previous plan doesn't need to be changed much. Chu Lu's eyes were shining and she was worried. The Hehuan sect had harmed her for many years. She really hoped that Su Li would continue to implement the plan and let the Hehuan sect suffer a big loss. Da, Su Li tapped the table with her fingertips. Chu Lu's hatred for the Hehuan sect couldn't be fake. Otherwise, the Hehuan sect wouldn't have such big news that shocked the martial arts circle in the previous life. It was the young woman who always looked nervous sitting in front of her. In the previous life, she exchanged her life for Yi Tian's serious injury and almost destroyed the Hehuan sect. Although it didn't succeed in the end, Chu Lu left a strong mark in the martial arts circle. She also made the Hongchen powder of the Hehuan sect a big joke in the martial arts circle. In Chu Lu's uneasy mood, Su Li finally said, "Of course, the plan should be implemented. However, it needs to be changed." Chu Lu was slightly stunned. In her opinion, the plan was perfect and there was no need to change it. "Do you have any news about the recent changes in the personnel entering the city?" Su Li didn't mention the change of the plan. Chu Lu didn't ask. She took the scroll out of her sleeve and said, "Recently, there are obviously more warriors entering the city from the gate of Yunjing. Most of them are not the Hehuan sect or the Lianxia cult, but a small force called the Yunj sect. Most of them come for the auction fair." Su Li's eyes flashed, but Chu Lu continued, "In addition to the personnel changes, there is another change that I am very concerned about. The Eighth Lord, Dongfang Rui, changed his previous state of seclusion and became active recently. Because of various things happened between him and the Su family, there was a great uproar in the city. I was a little concerned, so I sent someone to monitor the Eighth Lord's mansion. I found that the Eighth Lord's mansion seemed to be reorganizing the troops these days." Speaking of this, Chu Lu took a deep breath and her voice became lower and lower. "The butler of the Eighth Lord is called Wu Bin. He is the former commander of the Royal Guards. He has a high prestige in the Royal Guards. I suspect that the Eighth Lord wants to revolt." Su Li said easily, but Chu Lu's face changed slightly. "Do you think so, Master?" "No." All kinds of thoughts flashed through Su Li's mind. The doubts left in the previous life seemed to be explained by Chu Lu. Another one was solved. Before that, did Lord Rui enter the palace? "How do you know?" Chu Lu said in a low voice, "Eighth Lord did enter the palace 3 days ago, the second day after the feast." "That's right." Su Li picked up the pen and paper beside the table. She first wrote Yunj, then Dongfang Rui, and then the emperor's name, Dongfang Xiao. Chu Lu was scared. It was a big crime to write the emperor's name without authorization. Mr. Li didn't care about it at all. In the end, Su Li wrote the character Su, which represented Su Zipei. But because Chu Lu was the first character, she couldn't write the whole character, so she used the character Su instead. In her previous life, she had tried to kill Su Zipei more than once, but she failed every time. Because Su Zipei was always protected by someone. That person's cultivation was not as high as hers, but they cooperated tacitly and quietly. Their defense was airtight. Every time, Su Zipei was restrained. As time went by, more and more people came, and she had to retreat. Later, she investigated in many ways, but she didn't find such a person in the Royal Guards and the Wu family. It was another force. Before Chu Lu said Yunj, she always thought that those people were elites cultivated by Su Zipei. Now she suddenly realized. It was very likely that those people were from the Cloud Pavilion. Now the princes were fighting with each other secretly. Dongfang Xiao was old and useless, and they were about to take the throne. It seemed that no one cared that Dongfang Xiao was still the emperor. If she didn't see the force behind Dongfang Xiao in the previous life, Su Li would also think so. But now, she was very clear that it was not the Enmore cult or any sect that was in charge in Yunjing City. It was always the Dongfang family. Any trivial thing that happened in Yunjing City would be collected and analyzed by the Dongfang family. What's more, even if the Dongfang family didn't take action, they would come to observe secretly. It seemed that Dongfang Rui was also very clear about this. So, for the agreement with her, he went to Dongfang Xiao and seemed to get the answer. Thinking of this, Su Li tore off the paper and crushed it. She looked up and said, "Chu Lu, go back and wait for the news. Lord Rui will not attack the imperial palace. But no matter who he attacks, it will inevitably cause chaos in the city. It will be an opportunity. Before that, pay close attention to the movement of the Hehuan sect. If it is urgent, I will find you in person." Chu Lu took a deep breath and her eyes lit up. It seemed that Mr. Li's plan was bigger than she thought. However, the more chaotic it was, the more opportunities she had to take action. At that time, she would have a chance to take revenge on the people of the Hehuan sect. "Yes, Mr. Li. I will not let you down," Su Li said gently. Then she turned her palm and a white bottle appeared in her palm. She said, "In addition, you take this bottle of elixir first." "This, is it?" Thinking of her previous agreement with Su Li, Chu Lu couldn't help but tremble slightly. She was excited. Su Li shook her head and smiled. She said, "No, it is just an elixir to consolidate the corporeity. It was not the antidote of the Hongchen powder." Chu Lu was disappointed. She hesitated for a moment and nodded to take it. She couldn't help but ask, "I am not injured. Why do I have to take this? Isn't the Hongchen powder an injury? Poison?" Su Li smiled faintly. She said, "You are just afraid that the old poison has not been removed and the new poison will be born. However, I always like to win people by virtue. I will only choose to end the enemy's life by poisoning him." Chu Lu's face was slightly red when she heard that. Su Li knew what she was thinking about. Although you can't feel it, the Hongchen powder has been lurking in your body for 8 years. How can it not be hurt? Su Li glanced at Chu Lu. Chu Lu immediately felt that she was seen through. Her face was redder. "If you want to remove the poison, you must have a strong enough physique first. Otherwise, you can't bear the outbreak of the Hongchen powder when I remove the poison for you. You will die on the spot. Won't I break my promise?" Su Li patted Chu Lu's shoulder gently and said softly, "After the auction fair, the Hehuan sect in Yunjing City will disappear. At that time, your poison will be removed. It's up to you whether you want to leave or stay." Looking at Su Li's sincere and clear eyes, Chu Lu's heart beat faster. She had never seen such beautiful eyes. The light in them seemed to be nimbus. At this moment, Chu Lu had an intuition. This intuition came from the kindness of Su Li. She couldn't help but believe that this time she met a liar like Yi Tian. After 5 minutes, Chu Lu left at night. The cold wind blew through the window of the attic. Her hair was blown to Su Li's forehead. Her eyes were full of killing intent. Her father didn't seem to be sensible. If he didn't ask her to take revenge for her mother, she would be angry. The next morning, Dongfang Rui was still busy in the study. His eyes were red. It was obvious that he hadn't slept for several days. Wu Bin was distressed, but he didn't persuade Dongfang Rui because he knew that no matter what he said, Master would not listen to him. When Dongfang Rui came back from the imperial palace that day, he changed completely. Facing Wu Bin's inquiry, Dongfang Rui only said one sentence, "Gather all the people in the Yunj sect. Only by slaughtering the Wu family can I calm down my anger." Then, there was the next action. The Yunj sect was created by Dongfang Rui. Since the day Su Yun disappeared, he secretly cultivated this small force. The purpose was very simple. That was, when she found Su Yun, he would let the people in the Yunj sect protect her all the time so that she would never be hurt again. After finding Su Yun's body, Dongfang Rui was depressed for a while. Then, He cultivated the Yunj sect more fiercely. The purpose was to protect his future children from Su Yun. Now, the Yunj sect obviously had a new purpose. At this moment, a manservant suddenly came in. He trotted to Wu Bin and whispered something in his ear. Wu Bin was surprised. He bowed to Dongfang Rui and said, "Master, Miss is here. She wants to see you." Dongfang Rui was stunned for a moment. Then his stiff face showed joy. He put down the file and was about to go out. But when he walked to the door, he turned back and said hurriedly, "Quick, help me get clean clothes and a basin of water." He hadn't taken a bath for a few days. How could he see his daughter with such a sloppy appearance? Wu Bin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He quickly arranged someone to help Dongfang Rui freshen up. Under Dongfang Rui's constant urging, it only took less than a quarter to finish. Su Li sat in the room and took a sip of tea. In the blink of an eye, the table was filled with all kinds of imperial refreshments. Dongfang Rui came in a hurry. When he saw Su Li, his eyes lit up. But then he saw the refreshments beside Su Li. His excitement finally cooled down. He walked in and said slowly, "Li. Su Li, why do you come to find me? No matter what you say, I will try my best to do it." His words were stammering and not fluent at all. His tone was even lower, and he did not have the slightest bit of the dignity of a prince. Although he quickly dressed up and washed, Su Li could see at a glance that he was much haggard. After a moment of silence, Su Li's tone was not so cold. She said, "What can happen to me? But you, did you forget to tell me something?" Dongfang Rui was shocked and looked at Wu Bin, who just came in. Wu Bin was puzzled. The Lord and Miss were chatting well. Why did they suddenly look at him? At this time, Su Li said again, "Don't doubt Butler Wu. I have seen the movement of the prince's mansion. Someone told me that you want to rebel, but I know it is not true. Do you already know who killed my mother?" Dongfang Rui was silent. The movement of the Lord's mansion, even Su Li found it. He clearly did everything in secret. How could it be easily found? He had been sending people to monitor the Wu family. Everything was normal in the Wu family. There was no sign of fighting against the enemy. "Tell me, what are you worried about?" A slight smile suddenly appeared on Su Li's face, but Wu Bin was frightened by it. He said, "Are you worried that I will be stupid enough to seek revenge on him alone? Or have you forgotten the agreement between you and me?" "Of course. I haven't forgotten." Dongfang Rui looked bitter. He was just worried that after telling Su Li would be involved in quarrels for no reason like her mother. But now that Su Li came to him, he had to say it. Otherwise, he completely believed that Su Li would not recognize him. He took a deep breath and finally said, "It's the Wu family." Su Li's eyes flickered. "Which Wu family?" "General Wu's mansion. Wu Jin, Wu Xiuxiu." Chapter 199. Wu Lirong. How do you know this name? Dongfang Rui was slightly shocked. It was a name that was frequently mentioned in his era. Now no one mentioned it at all. How did Su Li know it? He suddenly found that his understanding of Su Li was just superficial. He knew nothing about how this girl rose up alone under the oppression of Zhu Yang and how she got the position of the lecturer of the affiliated school of the National Academy. Now, she had just been in Yunjing for less than a year, but her ability to grasp information was far better than him who grew up in Yunjing. Su Li narrowed her eyes and didn't answer. In the previous life, Lord Rui married a second wife soon after Su Zipei entered the general's mansion. The new wife was Wu Lirong of the Wu family. At that time, Wu Lirong was a widow. Her husband died early. It was said that she was a curse to her husband. Lord Rui married her at that time, which naturally caused some controversy. Later, Su Li poisoned Dongfang Rui. It seemed that Wu Lirong was a curse to her husband. "I'm just guessing." Su Li stopped thinking and looked up at Dongfang Rui. She said, "What was the relationship between Wu Lirong and my mother in those years?" Dongfang Rui's eyes darkened. Finally, he talked about the grievances in those years. In the year when Su Yun was studying in Yunjing, she gradually became friends with Dongfang Rui. Wu Lirong, who was also studying in the National Academy at that time, also fell in love with Dongfang Rui. Wu Lirong was the daughter of a general. She was superior to Su Yun in both status and identity. In her cognition, it was not difficult for Dongfang Rui to make a choice between them. Later, Dongfang Rui's actions told her that it was not difficult to make a choice. Dongfang Xiao agreed to the marriage and praised Su Yun as the female zhuge of the Dahan country. Her inner resentment and jealousy finally transformed into hatred. On the night before the wedding of Dongfang Rui and Su Yun, she used the identity of Su Yun's sister, Su Yu, to invite her. Su Yun was fooled. She hurried to the appointment and fell into the trap. Dongfang Rui stopped when he said that. The room fell into dead silence for a while. Dongfang Xiao didn't tell him what happened later. For him, it was enough to know that it was Wu Lirong who set the trap and chased Su Yun. Wu Lirong must have been approved by her father to use the soldiers. I don't care if she sends people secretly or openly, it has nothing to do with me. Dongfang Rui clenched his fists tightly and gritted his teeth. He said, only when I get Wu Lirong's head can I explain to your mother. Hearing this, Wu Bin was overwhelmed with emotions and his blood was boiling. It was rare to see a man as devoted to love as his master. Even if he had to die in the end, he would not regret it. Su Li sneered and poured cold water on him mercilessly. Dongfang Xiao asked you to fight against the Wu family. Are you willing to be used by him? Dongfang Rui frowned slightly. Su Li suddenly called him Dongfang Xiao. Although he was not close to his third brother, it was too unscrupulous for her to call him Dongfang Xiao. Miss. Wu Bin's complexion changed slightly. Su Li turned her head and stopped Wu Bin with Ling Li's eyes. She said, if my mother were still with you, she would definitely advise you to think twice. Think about it. If you really lead troops to attack the Wu family, how much chaos will it cause in Yunjing City? Dongfang Rui hesitated and didn't say anything. He only thought about revenge and didn't think about the consequences of rushing into the Wu family. Dongfang Rui's reaction disappointed Su Li. But on second thought, if her father was smart enough, he would not be used by Su Zipei in the previous life. Dongfang Rui was bold but not astute. At most, he had some achievements in training warriors. She should have thought of it earlier. Miss, just say it. Wu Bin was a little impatient. He couldn't help but ask, after Master made the decision, I felt it was very inappropriate. But I couldn't think of a reason. Su Li glanced at Wu Bin and continued to say to Dongfang Rui, I heard that you set the date of the auction. It's a good day. However, once the date is set, it means that a large number of sects in the martial arts circle will pour into Yunjing City. Dongfang Rui's expression finally changed. The biggest dream of every sect in the martial arts circle was to have a country as a backing. If chaos broke out in Yunjing City at this time, those sects would definitely take advantage of it. His brother had been in office for many years. How could he make such a stupid mistake? Dongfang Xiao is old. His princes all stare at the throne of the emperor. Each of them has their own ideas, just like you in those years. Su Li smiled meaningfully and said, I don't know how you felt when you saw Dongfang Xiao sweeping the world and becoming the emperor of the Dahan country. But obviously, his sons didn't inherit his deep scheming. The first prince and the Hahuan sect cooperated with each other. The third prince also had the help of the counselors of the sect. What do you think Dongfang Xiao will think when he sees this situation? Dongfang Rui's face was gloomy. If he still didn't understand Su Li's words, he was really an idiot. Dongfang Xiao wanted to use him to eliminate the forces of the sects behind the princes. Dongfang Rui felt bitter. When the third brother told him about the Wu family, he really thought that the third brother was soft-hearted. It turned out that the third brother had this idea. Su Li's analysis was reasonable. Dongfang Rui had no reason not to believe it. Seeing that his biological daughter not only grew up but also inherited her mother's quick thinking, Dongfang Rui was gratified. Yun, you definitely can't bear to see me in such pain and stupidity, so you sent her to me, right? Although she hasn't recognized me as her father, I am satisfied to see her live like this. Dongfang Rui was emotional and finally calmed down. He looked at Su Li and said, then, What do you think I should do? Su Li's eyes became cold and she said, I just give you a suggestion. What do you want to do? It's up to you. Since I can detect the movement of the prince's mansion, Dongfang Xiao and other sects can also detect it. You are like an arrow on the bow, and you have to shoot it. But there are many ways to attack the Wu family. After an hour, the tea was cold. Su Li stood up and saluted. Then she left the prince's mansion without saying anything. Dongfang Xiao knew Dongfang Rui's character well, but he didn't know Su Li was a variable. After returning to the affiliated school, Su Li began to buy a large number of secret medicines, including poison and wound medicine. Fortunately, Wu Bin was clever. He knew that Su Li was obsessed with refining medicine, so he sent a large number of medicinal materials. 80% of the stock of the prince's mansion was moved. Su Li didn't refuse because she was really short of medicinal materials. Some things couldn't be bought with money. Only people with a background like Dongfang Rui were qualified to get them. If she refused directly only because of the agreement between her and Dongfang Rui, she would be utterly naive. In this way, Wu Bin saw the hope of the reconciliation between the miss and the master. He immediately spent a lot of money to buy medicinal materials. In such a peaceful but not peaceful day, time went by. It was September 15th. On this day, it rained heavily. The entire Yunjing city was wrapped in rain. There were almost no pedestrians on the street. People didn't want to go out on rainy days. In front of the Lord Rui's mansion, thousands of royal guards were ready to go. It was full of killing intent. Dongfang Rui wore a military uniform and looked cold. The rain dripped along the edge of the helmet. Wu Bin beside him also looked cold. He held a long spear and shouted, "Go!" Boom! The horses galloped and splashed a lot of muddy water. In the blink of an eye, the Wu family was surrounded. Many people who thought that he was going to rebel were shocked. Dongfang Rui's target was the Wu family of the general's mansion. Why? It was said that Dongfang Rui almost married the daughter of the Wu family. How could he fight against the Wu family now? Suddenly being surrounded, the Wu family was already in a mess. The womenfolk living in the backyard even began to pack up and flee. Only the lineal children of the Wu family in the main house were still calm. Dad, there must be a misunderstanding. Why don't you let me go to negotiate? Wu Jin stood out and said respectfully. Wu Xiuxiu's eyes were full of worry. Her silly brother would be killed at this time. General Wu Suijun, looked at Wu Jin with appreciation. Then he said in a low voice, "No, Jin, you and Xiuxiu hide in the tunnel. Lord Rui is well prepared this time. He doesn't come with good intentions. He won't give up easily. I will meet him in person." Dad. Hearing this, all the children in the hall were suddenly worried. Wu Suijun was the backbone of the Wu family. If something happened to him, the Wu family would fall apart. That's settled. Wu Suijun stood up and sneered, "I don't believe that Dongfang Rui dares to kill me. He can kill me." But at this time, Wu Bin's murderous voice suddenly came into the mansion. He said, "According to the order of the emperor, the 8th Lord personally comes to arrest the real murderer of Su Yun, Wu Lirong. If anyone dares to stop me, I will kill him without mercy." Wu Suijuan's expression changed greatly. Dongfang Rui didn't act according to common sense at all. He clearly wanted to exterminate the Wu family, but his words were tactful. Even if the Wu family was killed, Dongfang Rui could use the excuse of stopping him from arresting the real murderer. When did Dongfang Rui, who only knew how to read sages and was full of righteousness, become so sinister? Kill. For a moment, the sound of killing was loud, and the screams of the Wu family were continuous. Neither Wu Bin nor Dongfang Rui showed any sign of mercy. They had been suppressed for too long. In the misty rain, Su Li stood on the roof and watched the fire of the Wu family from afar. A faint smile appeared on her face. "Dongfang Xiao, if you want to take advantage of Dongfang Rui, you have to see whether I agree or not." Fang Yuan stood aside and held an umbrella for Su Li. He couldn't help but transmit the sound in silence, "Don't we go to help?" Su Li shook her head slightly and looked at the shadows passing through the roof in the darkness. She said, "We have more important things to do. Let Chu Qingning pay attention to Wu Lirong. As long as he kills her, the interest of the Wu family will be paid. Fang Yuan nodded slightly and turned to look at the nothingness in the distance. With the noise of the rain, it was difficult for other sects to find them. In addition, Su Li set the tactical matrix in advance. Even if the group of people rushed to them, they might not find them. Soon, the first group of black shadows came to the street where the Wu family was located. The leader was Elder Dao, who arrived in Yunjing a few days ago. Elder Dao scanned the street with his psychic awareness and found the royal guards and Dongfang Rui guarding outside the door. He immediately sneered. The Wu family belonged to the first prince. The cooperation between the Hehuan sect and the first prince was still ongoing. Naturally, they should benefit each other and help each other. There were not many people around Dongfang Rui. As long as he captured Dongfang Rui and threatened him, the crisis of the Wu family would be eliminated. As for killing Dongfang Rui, he didn't want to offend the Dongfang family for the Hehuan sect for the time being. Capture Dongfang Rui with me. Don't worry about anything else. Elder Dao transmitted the sound in silence secretly. The people of the Hehuan sect immediately rushed to Dongfang Rui. In the blink of an eye, they were less than 50 meters behind Dongfang Rui. At this moment, swish, 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 swish. 8 black-robed figures jumped down from the roof of a nearby building at the same time, blotting out the sky. Without saying a word, they charged towards the Hehuan sect. As soon as they came into contact, several people from the Hehuan sect immediately screamed and fell down. Their blood dyed the rainy night red. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.